Hi everyone, please subscribe to my channel. Blood Immortal Venerable. See playlist for other chapters and novels. I do not translate the novels. Credits goes to original translator and author of the novel. I only make it as an audiobook so it would be easier to just listen while doing other things. Credits goes to the author of the novel. I convert stories to audiobook for mental health, for multitasking purpose, for accessibility and time saving. Listening to audiobook is also beneficial for people who have disability. It improves our listening skills and improve our English comprehension, vocabulary and other things. So, thank you for listening. Thank you and thank you very much for your support. Chapter 1421. Where are you? We must get out of here. Let's go. Let's dig a tunnel to the ground. These warriors at the Soul Sea Realm, the Spirit Supreme Realm, and the Spirit Transformation Realm all scrambled to run. While they might not be able to fight against the Grand Sorcerers, they could still escape. Nonetheless, such a path might even be more dangerous. Let me lead the way, Preston said. His primary mission was to protect Letitia, but as an elder of the sacred place, he believed it was his obligation to take the lead at the moment. He summoned some life vitality and turned it into a spiral which spun quickly, and then dashed toward a corner of the underground palace. His space law power shattered the palace walls with a loud crash, and a hole about the size of a man appeared in front of them. Follow me, ordered Preston as he led the group and dashed into the hole. Meanwhile, Letitia glanced at Preston's bleeding shoulders with gritted teeth, and then followed suit. She had been reigned with bad luck ever since she had ascended into the upper world. Thus, she had no choice but to follow Preston at the moment and see what would be out there for her. Preston himself tried hard to endure the biting of the skulls on his back as he dug his way forward, with Letitia and the other core disciples of the pure jade sacred place close behind him. After a long time of digging forward, Preston dug upward and finally reached the ground. His eyes first scanned the surroundings, and then he dashed toward a specific direction. Let's head for the Supreme World Channel, he exclaimed. But where should we go through the Supreme World Channel? Someone asked. When Preston heard the question, he abruptly stopped in his tracks. To be honest, he hadn't thought about that. It seemed that there was no safe escape. The sorcerer race might have invaded the nearby Cyan Lotus sacred place as well. Where else could they run to? Meanwhile, black lightning bolts continued to flash in the sky. Is the sorcerer race going to occupy the entire pure jade sacred place? He wondered. However, that was almost impossible. The ancient sorcerer race wasn't strong enough to occupy the place forever. They weren't powerful enough to fight the Supreme Lords, and the Humanity Alliance had more than 10,000 world lords. If they joined forces, the sorcerer race wouldn't stand a chance. Once the Supreme Lords came, the sorcerer race would have no choice but to escape. They wouldn't have a chance against the combined forces of all the other races in the universe. The only reason why the humans were in an unfortunate situation was because the sorcerer race's sudden attack caught them off guard. Still, now wasn't the time to think about such things. They still had to keep going before the reinforcements would arrive. There's still one place that we can escape to, Letitia suddenly said as she followed closely behind Preston. But Preston only glanced at her briefly. He didn't expect her to give him any good suggestions anyway. He thought that Letitia only happened to be Zen's wife, but she had just ascended to the upper world so she knew little about the things in this place. How could she even give him any good options? Then again, Letitia didn't mind his indifference and continued, the lower world. We can go to the lower world. That's right, now that the universe is in chaos, the lower world is probably the only safe place to go. We can go there through the ascending passageway. It sounds like a good suggestion. Except for Letitia, the other warriors were all from the upper world who subconsciously looked down on the lower world. Thus, they never really thought about escaping there even when they were already in such a big crisis. On the other hand, Letitia had come from the lower world, which was why she thought of such a plan. But, if we return to the lower world, I'm afraid that the great world will reject us, added Letitia. Don't worry, this isn't a problem for us, Preston nodded and said, this is a feasible plan. Follow me. It wasn't that difficult for warriors of the upper world to avoid the repelling power of a great world. After all, there were some items they could use to descend to the lower world. After they'd made their decision, Preston quickly led the group to the Supreme World Channel and rushed towards the ascending wells in the pure jade sacred place. In the territory of the Celestial Position race, Supreme Lord of Oracle was the first one who left. Most of the roaring tokens that called for help were from the World Lords of the Humanity Alliance, which meant that they were the ones who encountered the most enemies. As the leader of the Humanity Alliance, she had to hurry back in the soonest possible time. The other Supreme Lords also followed suit, and left one by one. Soon enough, only the 9 godly geniuses and Master Feng remained in the cave. Karl's body had already been taken away, and no one knew if he could be revived. I never thought that the sorcerer race would be so rampant. They started the days of chaos, Nathan said with a frown. He had heard the cries for help from the regions of the thoughtless minds, and some of the supreme worlds under attack were governed by his clan. Lawson snorted coldly and said, "Our patriarchs will soon deal with them. The sorcerer race is no match for the supreme lords. Even their grand sorcerers are only at the world lord's level." "What's the matter, Zen?" Margaret asked out of the blue. She was concerned when she saw the expression on his face. Zen's eyes were filled with worry and he couldn't mask his true feelings. It turned out that he was worried about Letitia. With the help of the memories of the great world, he knew that Letitia wasn't in the lower world anymore. Thus, it could only mean that she had also ascended to the upper world. But where was she now? Zen knew that Letitia's cultivation base made it hard for her to obtain a roaring token. He was worried for her safety, especially now that the war broke out. "All right, now is the time to decide your arrangements," Master Feng said. The godly geniuses had to grow quickly. They had outstanding talents and powerful strengths, but they could still risk getting killed by the sorcerer race and the intruders. Fortunately, after their blood had been exchanged, they could at least avoid the attacks of the intruders. Now, where will we go? Lone asked curiously. He originally thought that they would remain in the celestial position race's territory. But before Master Feng could announce his arrangements, Zen had already brought out his roaring token, and his voice reverberated throughout the entire universe. "Letitia, where are you?" He felt his heart sink with regret. He should have looked for her earlier. Ever since he had ascended to the upper world, the entire universe had been quite peaceful. No one could have imagined that the world would be suddenly plunged into chaos when the illusion battlefield had closed. Now, Zen knew that it was almost impossible to receive a response from Letitia, but he didn't know how else to contact her. Meanwhile, Letitia had actually heard Zen's call. At that moment, Preston led Letitia through the Supreme World Channel. He and the other warriors from the Pure Jade Sacred Place also heard Zen's voice. "It's Zen," Letitia exclaimed in shock. Even amidst the danger, she was naturally excited to hear her husband's voice. "But we can't respond to him. Let's continue on our way," Preston said. He couldn't help but sigh deeply. They had no way to communicate with Zen. If they had known earlier that such a thing would happen, the Saint Lord would have given Letitia a roaring token. While roaring tokens were rare and precious, they could help them bring reinforcements faster. The Humanity Alliance had only sent Supreme Lord of Oracle to the Celestial Position race, while the other Supreme Lords such as Supreme Lord Helm and Supreme Lord Illusion had remained in the Alliance. However, the Sorcerer race had an advantage when they simultaneously attacked many places. Thus, the reinforcements for the Pure Jade Sacred Place might be delayed. The situation left them no other choice but to follow their plan and try to descend to the lower world. Chapter 1422, Finally found Letitia. Zen frowned. He had already waited for a really long time but there was still no response from Letitia. "Zen, has Master Ning ascended as well?" Roche asked. He had ascended before her so he naturally did not know what happened in the central region after his departure. "Yes, I'm sure she has ascended. Heaven rewards the good. Master Ning is a good person. Moreover, the sorcerer race does not have the strength to challenge the Humanity Alliance. She'll be fine," Roche said in an attempt to console him, though he had no idea why Zen was so sure that Letitia had also ascended. "Yes, Letitia will be okay," Margaret followed, also trying to ease his worries. At this moment, she didn't dare to say anything that would annoy him. The others were quick to understand that this Letitia was an extremely important person to him. Zen thought for a moment before turning to Master Feng. "I need to go and find someone." Master Feng was just about to make some arrangements for them but it seemed Zen was in no way willing to participate. The old man also noticed the worry in his eyes. "You are going to look for the girl named Letitia?" Zen nodded. "Yes, I'm sorry but she's my wife." Margaret couldn't help but feel a pang of hurt when she heard Zen refer to Letitia as his wife. Although she referred to Zen as her husband, she was not officially married to him. "Does she have any unique features?" Master Feng inquired. The Supreme Lords in this universe possessed extremely powerful calculation abilities. However, they were not necessarily omnipotent. There were only 128 crowns of destiny. When a crown of destiny appeared in the universe, there was a high probability for Supreme Lords to perceive its location because of its uniqueness. That was the reason why so many of them swarmed towards Zen when he activated a crown of destiny back then. A Supreme Lord could locate the whereabouts of any warrior using their calculations, but this would be extremely hard without any knowledge of the characteristics and important identifiers of the person being sought. There were too many living creatures in this universe after all. Master Feng's willingness to help ignited the hope in Zen's heart. She is an ascended warrior from the lower world and she may have arrived not long ago. Before entering the illusion battlefield, Zen took the liberty of going through the memories of the Great World's will. Letitia was still in the Great World at the time, but she promptly disappeared upon his departure from the illusion battlefield. That meant she must have ascended. Those were the only clues Zen could offer, and Master Feng frowned at the scarcity of information. This was going to be a bit difficult since she did not have any obvious or unique features to help narrow down his search. In other words, this was going to be like looking for a needle in a haystack. "Let me read your soul then," Xenia, who was beside Rocher, offered. "Read my soul," Zen repeated, a bit stunned at her proposal. The soul-searching technique normally caused irreversible damage to one's soul, but it was an option Zen had already considered to pinpoint Letitia's location in the event that they were unable to think of any other solution. However, he wasn't aware that there was another method known as the soul-reading technique. A few select people possessed the ability to read souls in this universe. The Saint Lord of the Pure Jade Sacred Place, for example, had the ability to verify the truth of Letitia's statements without causing her any harm. Xenia also possessed such ability, and hers was even more advanced. Hearing her explanation of her technique, Zen did not show any bit of hesitation in accepting her proposal. Sure, he had a few secrets he wouldn't want others to know, but Zen did not really have the luxury to care about such things. Finding Letitia was a paramount concern at that moment. Xenia walked in front of Zen and stared up at him with her delicate eyes. She curled her little and ring fingers on both her hands and then reached out. Her thumbs, index and middle fingers were pressed against Zen's temples. "Try your best to think about Letitia's features." Zen closed his eyes and did as she said. Xenia closed her eyes as well. Slowly, strings of lightning segments began to appear on her hands and spiral all the way towards Zen's head. The lightning power entangled and rose from Zen's head. Her soul-reading technique was way superior compared to other people's. She could use lightning to draw out the memories she had to read. However, this wasn't anything special. It was only an extension of nature. A warrior, so long as they mastered the spiritual projection method, could use life vitality to perfectly duplicate whatever they visualized. This wasn't very difficult for Xenia, who was already a high-level warrior. Soon enough, Letitia's exquisite figure gradually appeared and floated above Zen's head. "Master Feng, please calculate as soon as possible," Xenia said, still with her eyes closed. Master Feng stared at Letitia's appearance and nodded in affirmation. He held out a wrinkled finger where many colorful beads began to burst forth. The beads were the size of a fingertip and were extremely colorful, like stars floating in the universe. The calculation methods of each person varied. There was the purple star astrology, the 8 diagrams, and the 10 heavenly stems and 12 earthly branches. However, Master Feng's method of calculation was rather unique. It was called the fantasy star calculation technique. He was looking for Letitia, a newly ascended female warrior from the lower world. These were the only clues Master Feng could work with, but Xenia's visualization of Letitia's physical features was of great help to him. His calculations were sped up since he now knew what she looked like. After a few moments, a strange expression appeared on Master Feng's face. "How is it?" Zen asked, seeing the anxious expression on the old man's face. "This woman has indeed encountered some trouble. It seems that the sorcerer race have invaded the supreme world she is in," he replied. "Which supreme world? Is she injured?" Zen asked. After finding out her current situation, he really wanted to rush to her side as soon as possible. "The Pure Jade Sacred Place of the Humanity Alliance." But, Master Feng paused. Zen planned to use the teleportation token to instantly travel to where she was, but he waited until Master Feng finished what he had to say. "It seems she is planning to go back to the lower world soon to take refuge there." Zen's eyes flashed. "Go back to the great world?" Rocher's eyes brightened. "This is indeed a good idea." Now knowing where Letitia was, Zen finally felt slightly at ease. It was fortunate for him that both Xenia and Master Feng were willing to help him. Zen was already quite dissatisfied with the celestial position, though he knew that the race had no intention of harming him. They just tried their best to hide vital information away from him. "Something's not right. There seems to be something following them into the ascending passageway," Master Feng continued. "Why is the sorcerer race chasing after these people?" His words caused Zen's heart to beat nervously. "Can you calculate which great world they're heading to?" He had already seen the entirety of the universe through the use of his teleportation token. He knew for a fact that the ascending passageways of each supreme world were connected to many great worlds below, and he needed to know their position before he could set off. Master Feng nodded and immediately resumed his calculations. After a few moments, he was able to come up with the conclusion that Letitia was going to be returning to the great world she originally came from. However, it would take over 10 days to travel in the ascending passageway before they could reach the lower world. Chapter 1423. Return to the lower world. Zen couldn't wait to set off. He had the memories of the great world, so he would immediately know the exact moment Letitia returned. The only thing he wanted to do at that moment was to rush to the great world and wait for Letitia to descend. Warriors in the upper world could only pass through the ascending passageways to go to the great worlds. Since Letitia's life was still in danger, Zen did not accept any of Master Feng's transportation options. He wanted to teleport directly to the great world by activating the teleportation token. Zen, I'll go with you. Rocher followed behind him. Naturally, Margaret wanted to go with Zen. Finally, after much deliberation, Xenia, Lone and Lucille also decided to descend to the lower world with them. Nathan and Lawson both seemed indifferent, but in the end, they also agreed to go together with the others. All of you, Master Feng was about to announce an extremely important matter for the future of the 10 godly geniuses. He had sacrificed a great deal in order to give them the opportunity. However, even before he could utter a single word, Zen used the roaring token to speak, interrupting him. Furthermore, the group of warriors all wanted to leave together with Zen. As the leader of the celestial position as well as being one of the most powerful supreme lords in the universe, Master Feng couldn't help but feel dejected. He suddenly realized how fast the world had changed. These warriors were still too young. They knew the fate they faced, but they didn't seem to realize the gravity of it. Sometimes, Master Feng wondered if he was too lenient in their training. Their elders had already entrusted their care and their training to the celestial position, so he needed to speak a piece of his mind and criticize them. He needed them to understand the current situation. But before he could say anything, an ethereal voice spoke into his mind. Let them go. This is also part of their training. When Master Feng heard this voice, he surprisingly recognized it. Have you woken up a bit early? We can delay the plan to send them to the training land. The enemies wouldn't be able to break through the signing wall that quickly. At the moment, the sorcerer race members would only be able to activate the troublesome things that have been buried underground for the past hundreds of millions of years. You could deal with them on your own. But we still have to be wary of the demon knight race and the ogre race. I can't ensure that they would take our side, the voice said flatly. Master Feng nodded. The man who talked with him was the most important supporter of the celestial position. Since this elder had already spoken, Master Feng had no choice but to listen to him. Letting Zen and the others descend to the lower world was risky. However, the celestial position race could secretly arrange for members to watch over the group. In this way, their original plan could be put off for some time in the future. Zen originally planned to utilize the teleportation token to return instantly to the great world. At most, Freya would be the only one he brought with him. However, just as the two of them were about to leave, Rocher and Margaret followed close at his heels, with the other godly geniuses not far off. We can pass through the ascending passageway to go to the lower world, but we need to have the moon-shrouding stone, Xenia reminded. It seemed to her that Zen did not know how to return to the lower world. Moon-shrouding stone, what is that? Zen asked. Lucille smiled faintly as she heard this. The moon-shrouding stone is an important object that will protect you from being rejected by the great world and help you enter the lower world. Oh, I see, Zen acknowledged. In the past, it piqued his curiosity as to how the Spirit Supreme Realm warriors of the upper world were able to enter the great world. Several hours later, a bright bolt of brilliantly white lightning streaked across the sky above the sea of the great world. The powerful space spread outwards violently, forming a great space windstorm. There were a few powerful water monsters circling on the surface of the sea, but after sensing the aura of the space windstorm, the water monsters scattered and hid into the depths of the sea. Zen was the first to emerge from the space windstorm, followed by Freya, Rocher, Xenia, Lucille, and the rest of the godly geniuses. Nathan and Lawson lagged behind the others like the usual. Initially, the two never intended to follow them. But as they saw that the other godly geniuses went along with Zen, they also decided to leave with them. The godly geniuses looked at the scenery around them with awe, their faces filled with shock. They were amazed by Zen's teleportation token. According to Xenia's plan, they would have had to travel the ascending passageway for at least half a month before they could reach the lower world. It baffled them that Zen had such a magical item. The teleportation token seemed to have the ability to travel to any place in the universe, and it was even more convenient than the Supreme Lord's grand teleportation. This unique item was too amazing for this entire universe, so they had a hard time accepting its capabilities. Zen didn't really want to show them this teleportation token, but the current circumstances warranted its use. He wanted to rescue Letitia at the soonest possible time. The moment Zen emerged from the space windstorm, a strong force repelled him. The moon-shrouding stone in his hand suddenly glowed with a faint radiance and entered Zen's body, helping him counteract the repelling force. "I'm finally back." A sharp glint appeared in Zen's eyes as he said the words. He had been away from this place for a few years, and this was the first time Zen had returned to his homeland. He was giddy with excitement and mixed emotions. It had never crossed his mind that the reason he returned for the first time in ages was to save Letitia. Zen looked around, and saw nothing but the endless sea. The place where their party had descended was in the depths of the sea. The moment Zen had entered the great world, he already felt the connection with this world. It was the embodiment of the will of the plane, which gave Zen a strange sense of security. In this plane, Zen could transfer all the damage he had incurred into the great world. Unless this great world was destroyed, he would be immortal and indestructible. Letitia hadn't emerged from the ascending passageway, and descending into the great world through the ascending passageway was a relatively slow process. In the past, Zen had taken half a month to ascend to the upper world. But now he returned to the great world in advance to wait for Letitia to come back. The universe was going to suffer a cataclysm soon. Zen had already laid out a plan of his own. Before the crisis happened, he would take all his loved ones to live in the fairy palace. That was the only place where he could guarantee their safety. After he got his bearings, Zen figured out his own location. He was located at the west part of the great world. If he continued to head west, he would reach the wall of the great world. To the east lay the central region. Zen wasn't sure where Letitia would land, so he could only settle down first. He used his will to monitor the entire plane and waited for Letitia to show up. This way, Zen flew towards the east as he led the group. The godly geniuses followed closely behind him. "The life vitality in this place seems to be too placid," Lucille said as she observed her surroundings during her flight. Chapter 1424, The Cloudy City. "It's not that the life vitality is mild here. We barely detect it as there is so little," Lawson observed indifferently. Although the life vitality in the upper world was definitely more violent, it was also more concentrated than in the lower world. This was the godly geniuses' first time to descend to the lower world, and it made them feel a bit out of their element. Fortunately, they all brought enough life vitality jades with them. It wouldn't affect them much even if the life vitality here was insufficient. On the other hand, Nathan's expression was a little gloomy. He and Lawson only came to the lower world because Lucille went along with Zen. He didn't think that their presence here was necessary. They had flown over the sea for an entire day and night, and had encountered a few vicious beasts along the way. But when these vicious beasts felt the powerful auras of these people, they sank back into the sea and stayed hidden. Lawson and Nathan had nothing interesting to do during their travel. They had casually caught and killed some of the ferocious beasts they encountered, and caused a huge commotion. As the sun rose on the second day, a white line appeared on the horizon in front of Zen. The white line steadily increased in size as they flew closer. It was a snowy mountain standing on the surface of the sea. Seeing the snow-capped mountain, Zen couldn't help but smile. He recognized the mountain, and knew that it was located in the west of the central region. They had already reached their destination. After crossing the boundary of the snowy mountain, they didn't even pause for rest. They continued to travel east until they reached the first city, the Mysterious City. This city was built by the mysterious Luna Hall. Although the power of the mysterious Luna Hall was not as great as it had been before, there was still a spatial passageway in the city. Whoosh, whoosh, Zen's group quickly descended from the sky and landed in front of the spatial passageway. The guards at the entrance to the spatial passageway did not know what to do upon seeing the warriors. They didn't know where these people came from. To their intense surprise, each of these warriors radiated a strong aura, and their cultivation levels were immeasurable. Fortunately for them, these people did not seem to have any intention of enmity. They even made an effort to conceal their auras. Otherwise, these guards would have fainted on the spot from sheer terror. You, what are you trying to do?" The leader of the guards stammered, his courage slightly greater than his companions. "We intend to use the spatial passageway that leads to Cloudy City." Zen's eyes swept over them. With a flick of his hand, 2 supreme life vitality crystals materialized in front of the guard and Zen stepped into the passageway. Xenia, on the other hand, smiled kindly towards the guards. Only then did all of the warriors follow Zen into the spatial passageway. The guards simultaneously breathed a sigh of relief after all these people had disappeared. At that moment, the cloudy city was enveloped in silence. Ever since Zen had left for the upper world, the situation in the central region had been under control by the Cloud Hall and the World Commercial Alliance. Other powers had shown some signs of rising up, such as the ethereal spirit sect, but they were left far behind. In just a short span of time, 2 warriors from the Cloud Hall had already ascended to the upper world. One was Zen, the other one was Letitia, leader of the Cloud Hall. This was a very rare occurrence through the history of the central region. The legends about the 2 of them had long been known and told among countless people. Right then, the spatial passageway between the cloudy city and the mysterious city suddenly fluctuated. Zen took a step forward, and his gaze fell upon the pure white clouds in the sky. He was relieved that the Cloud Hall was still floating above the cloudy city. Over the years, he had actually searched often through the memories of the great world. He was keenly aware of each and every matter that happened in the central region. When he saw the Cloud Hall at that moment, he had a strange feeling in his heart. After all, it was after he ascended to the upper world that Letitia gave birth to their son, and he realized that he was already a father. The transmission array at the cloudy city was expanded 2 years ago. Right now, the cloudy city could be considered as the center of the central region. The spatial passageway extended to 4 major directions, connecting 13 large cities. It could be considered as one of the most important transportation routes in the entire central region. You may not want to go to the cloudy city, but if you want to go to some of the more remote cities, you'd have to use the transmission array of the cloudy city, they would say. The sudden appearance of Zen's group immediately made them the center of unwanted attraction. The guards of the Cloud Hall immediately surrounded them. According to the city's rules, they needed to interrogate the newcomers about their intentions. Because of the Cloud Hall, these guards were used to encounters with quite a few powerful figures. However, Zen's group undeniably exuded a powerful presence the moment they stepped out of the transmission array. This type of aura was generated when many mighty warriors were mingling together in one place. Take Rocher, for example. He gave off a refreshing feeling that was very comfortable, but one that couldn't be ignored. Zen, on the other hand, gave off a feeling of sharpness, as if he was a sword that was always kept inside its sheath. Although it was sheathed, one could not deny that it was very sharp. Lucille was like a cold plum, cold but not difficult to approach. The leader of the guards braced himself and rallied his subordinates over. The leader thought to himself, the central region has only been at peace for the last 7 to 8 years. Today, a group of people that shouldn't be provoked appeared. We need to be ready for anything that might happen. For regular people like them, they knew that if they upset these warriors, they would probably be annihilated instantly. The leader of the guards had been guarding the transmission array for more than a decade already. He had met Zen on several occasions in the past, and every time he saw Zen, his level of cultivation would be much higher than the last time. As he came nearer, he immediately recognized Zen. This time, Zen's level of cultivation was so strong that he could no longer gauge it. Having learned from the mistakes of the past few years, the leader did his best to hold back his emotions. "Is it Master Luo who has returned?" he asked in a trembling voice. He was uncertain of how to address Zen. It was a conditioned reflex of his to add the word, Master, to his surname, and he knew he could never go wrong. Master Luo? What Master Luo? Who is this person? The other guards were puzzled, not realizing who their leader was referring to. Zen had been gone for around 7 years. In the eyes of the people in the central region, he was already a legendary figure. It was hard for them to believe that he had returned. Right then, several other figures emerged from another spatial passageway. They were members of the Zhou clan in Cloudy City, and the one leading the group was none other than Frank. After many years of hard work, he had finally overcome the bottleneck and stepped into the Virtual Tribulation Realm. Virtual Tribulation Realm warriors had the capability to hold the position of elders in the past Cloud Hall. However, the current Cloud Hall was already considered as a sacred place, so naturally, the requirements for each position would increase at the same time. After the number of Virtual Tribulation Realm martial artists increased in number, Frank did not qualify for the elder position anymore. This time, he had just returned from completing a mission at the Ethereal Spirit Sect. The moment he stepped out of the spatial passageway, he felt a terrifying aura. After he saw the appearance of the person in the lead, Frank's expression drastically changed. It was his father's killer, Zen. Chapter 1425, Zen's son. After all these years of training, Frank was able to control his mind and stabilize it. It was as calm as the sea. He also knew that the rebellion led by his father had almost ruined the entire Zhou clan. He didn't know whether he still hated Zen or not, all he knew was that he was like a tiny worm in front of Zen. Therefore, he wasn't angry at all when he saw Zen again. Instead, he was quite shocked. Zen, Frank stood there in a daze. When the Zhou clan warriors behind him heard this, they were also equally stunned. Only then did others recognize Zen. It's really him. He's actually back. Zen is back. Zen was not from Cloudy City, but this did not prevent him from becoming the hero of the city. Warriors of the city not only worshipped him, but also showed him off to outsiders. At first, everyone was a little nervous. This group of mighty warriors could easily destroy the Cloudy City. So how could they dare to speak carelessly? However, they weren't as nervous after hearing Zen's name. After all, he used to be a member of Cloud Hall. Zen looked at Frank with indifference. Since the entire Zhou clan had received their due punishment for their rebellion, he wouldn't care about this matter anymore. He nodded to Frank casually and said, "Let's go to the Cloud Hall." "I'll lead the way," said Frank immediately. He had also seen Margaret in the crowd. After he saw Rocher, his heart was filled with shock once again. He was not acquainted with Margaret. After all, when she entered the Cloud Hall, she stayed by Zen's side throughout and rarely went out. But he was quite familiar with Rocher and was aware that he had received a great deal of attention from the Cloud Hall. But how did his cultivation reach such a level? He couldn't even figure out what level Rocher's cultivation was at because Rocher was now much stronger than him. He was confused, but he did not shoot his mouth off. In the end, he came to a conclusion that this was not an ordinary group of people. "Ha ha, is this where you used to live, Zen?" After controlling for a long time, Lawson finally couldn't hold it in anymore. He and Nathan had come to this great world to accompany Lucille and join in on the fun. The ace talents and godly geniuses of the 4 great clans had been isolated from the outside world. They rarely went out, and even after leaving the clans, the place of the lowest level they had seen was a 10th grade sacred place. Almost all the people they had encountered were at least at the Soul Sea realm. At this moment, they felt that they had arrived at a very special habitat. There were many warriors at the nature level and they were all incredibly weak. A world of ants. Nathan could not help but snigger. The Zhou clan martial artists were leading the way. Hearing their conversation, Frank and the others were extremely nervous. Just who were these people? Why did these 2 fellows sound so intimidating? Could it be that Zen was being held hostage? All these people must be from the upper world. However, nobody dared to refute or debate with them. They were indeed not much stronger than ants in these people's eyes. If you 2 are going to continue with this nonsense, then scram back to the upper world. Margaret turned her head and scrunched her eyebrows as she reprimanded them. She was from this great world too and hated how these 2 people were looking down on the world where she was born and raised. She knew that Zen did not like these 2 fellows, but they were still guests. Letitia was being hunted down, and they would be waiting here to help her, and maybe the duo would be able to help them. After all, their strength could not be underestimated. But their personalities were somewhat annoying. Margaret's words had the desired effect. Lawson's only response was a rude snort, while Nathan remained silent. This scene immediately changed Frank's opinion. He had a whole new level of respect for Margaret. However, they knew too little about the upper world, and their guesses were completely inaccurate. News of Zen's return had spread like wildfire in the central region. The original group of warriors was now being followed by a massive crowd. Of course, only those warriors who were at the illuminating soul realm and above were able to fly. Warriors under the illuminating soul realm could only look up at the sky and sigh wistfully. They didn't have the chance to see the number 1 warrior of the central region. Just as Zen entered the Cloud Hall, he saw a flame rising from not too far away, followed by the wails of some people. Strangely, a child's laughter could also be heard at the same time. A puzzled expression appeared on Zen's face as he asked, "Who dares to cause trouble in the Cloud Hall?" The current Cloud Hall was considered to be the number 1 sect in the central region. Who could have penetrated the great sect protecting array set up by Zen and dared to cause trouble there? A bitter smile appeared on Frank's face. After enduring for a while, he said, "Go take a look for yourself and you will know." On his way back to the Cloud Hall, Zen planned to meet Imogen first and settle this group of godly geniuses. Then, he would closely monitor the entire great world. No matter where Letitia went, he would take action immediately. With his curiosity taking over, he kicked the floor and floated toward where the whales came. What he saw was a boy clad in golden brocade clothes. In his hand was a divine texture of raging flame, which was constantly emitting flames as it burned the house in front of him. The house was sealed shut with divine textures, making it impossible for the people inside to escape. The temperature of the house was like an oven, one could only imagine how hot it must be inside. That was why so many screams could be heard. The people in the house were crying and begging to be let out. However, the boy showed no mercy at all. With a flick of his finger, the flames within the divine texture swirled towards the house like dragons made of fire. He was extremely skilled at manipulating the fire. With a frown, Zen floated over and hissed in a low voice, "Stop." When the boy heard Zen's voice, he turned around. A trace of wickedness flashed across his clear eyes. The divine texture in his hand rolled towards Zen. Swoosh! A long flaming dragon charged towards Zen, engulfing him within itself. The boy laughed fiendishly. "I'll turn you into a roast chicken." However, when the flames dissipated, the boy was stunned. The scene he had envisioned did not happen. The person in front of him was completely unharmed. The power of this divine texture was unbelievable. Once it was activated with life vitality crystals, even a virtual tribulation realm martial artist would be unable to withstand it. This was the first time the boy had experienced such a pushback. "What's your name?" Zen asked as he glared at the boy. The boy blinked and smirked. His slender fingers had already locked onto another divine texture. "What's it to you?" he spat. "Is your surname Luo?" Zen asked again. The boy smiled triumphantly. "Yes." As his voice faded, he took advantage of the opportunity to flip another divine texture token. A bolt of lightning shot out from it. On the other hand, Zen raised his head and waved his hand. The powerful bolt of lightning split apart, and his expression turned sour. Chapter 1426, Jeffrey. Zen was pretty sure the boy was his son. He could very clearly see that the boy's features matched his own more than those of Letitia. The boy was very proficient in dealing with divine features. Nevertheless, Zen still felt that the divine features should have been created by someone else rather than by the boy himself. "You're still young, yet so unruly," exclaimed Zen angrily. Snap! Zen flicked the air with his fingers and shattered the two divine texture tokens that the boy was holding in his hands. The boy looked in disbelief at the shattered divine texture tokens in his hands. He pursed his lips to control his emotions, but could not hold it any longer and burst into tears. He was born and brought up in Cloud Hall by Letitia, who dearly loved and cared for the boy. Imogen also accompanied him every day, which was how he developed such a strong personality. His not-so-decent reputation was known throughout Cloud Hall. People wondered if there was anyone who would dare to discipline him. Because of this, people were wary of approaching him. "How dare anybody bully my Jeffrey?" hollered Imogen as she appeared on the other side holding a walking stick. Earlier when Zen announced his arrival at the Cloud Hall, Imogen had already been informed. Hearing Jeffrey crying miserably, she rushed to him, furious that anyone could put her boy in such a state. Imogen's heart was torn. Zen's return to Cloud Hall was a joyous occasion to celebrate, but Jeffrey's pitiful state was above everything else now. Imogen's lifespan could be considered extremely long among the warriors in the central region. After so many years, all her relatives had finally reached their graves, and the only one she was closest to was Letitia. Later on, when Letitia became pregnant and gave birth to Jeffrey, Imogen took care of him like her own grandchild. Imogen took great care of Letitia when she became pregnant, feeding her with rare and precious herbs and fruits. Soon after Jeffrey was born, Imogen poured the natural energy into his body. She had bathed him with water from the dragon saliva spring till he turned a year old. It was considered to be lucky if a martial artist could drink water from the dragon saliva spring. But Imogen used the water only to bathe Jeffrey. Imogen did not consider Jeffrey's unruly behavior towards others as a grave problem. After all, he was raised by her own upbringing. Hence when she saw her Jeffrey shedding such precious tears, she was very angry with Zen. Seeing Imogen, Zen respectfully folded his hands and greeted her, "Master Yu." Imogen cast an angry glance at Zen, and then her eyes fell on Margaret. She snorted and turned to look at the godly geniuses behind Zen. Tia went to the upper world leaving young Jeffrey behind in the Cloud Hall in search of Yu. "Where is she now?" Glancing at Margaret once more, she added, "Why did you come back without Tia by your side?" Imogen was only at the third stage of the life and death realm. At this age, it was very difficult for her to advance any further, so she was unable to ascend to the upper world. She did not even know what was going on in the upper world, nor did she know it was extremely hard for a warrior to find someone in the upper world. However, she wouldn't reason with Zen and would only interrogate him. "I came back for Tia." She is being hunted by the sorcerer race and is flying down the ascending passageway, Zen answered honestly. Bang! What? Imogen threw the walking stick onto the floor and, a stone board immediately broke into two halves. She exclaimed, the reason behind Tia's ascension was to find you. And you had the nerve to come back without her. Tia was definitely blind to marry such an ungrateful mongrel like you. Hearing Imogen rage, Lawson and Nathan chuckled under their breath. They realized Imogen was being unreasonable, but they couldn't help releasing their amusement. Zen was not a supreme lord or a true god to know that Letitia had ascended. More so, it was impossible for him to know which supreme world she had ascended to. Does she think that the upper world is about the same size as this great world? They thought. As for Lucille and Kurt, they just pretended that they heard nothing. After all, this was Zen's family matter. Why do you slander him this way? There are 100,000 supreme worlds, and a single supreme world is many times larger than this great world. Looking for a person in the upper world is like looking for a needle in a haystack. How can you blame it on Zen? Margaret could not help but come forward and defend Zen. Rocher also stepped forward, folded his hands and addressed to Imogen, Master Yu, the current circumstances cannot be really blamed on Zen. Anyway, we are well aware about Letitia's whereabouts. The only reasonable way is to wait for her in this world. But Imogen refused to see through reason. All she cared to see was that Letitia had left to find her husband, but he returned with another woman. How could this act be forgiven? Imogen had instantly disliked Margaret from the beginning. After flicking her a glance, Imogen said to Zen, seems like you have forgotten Tia, now that you are with this jerk. Who are you calling a jerk? Suddenly a bright light flashed in Margaret's eyes and 4 swords pierced out. Margaret's strength was much more powerful than it used to be. Although she was at the late stage of the Soul Sea realm, her killing intent was formidable. The warriors in the Cloud Hall felt that an ancient beast was unleashed. The people trembled under this aura. Wah! Jeffrey was frightened at this sudden change of events before his eyes. First he was reprimanded by Zen and now Margaret was unleashing her wild side. With a fearful cry, he rushed towards Imogen, who took him in her arms. Imogen was equally shocked to see the other side of Margaret. She never liked Margaret and now hated her even more. But she couldn't just fight Margaret head-on as the latter was able to destroy the whole Cloud Hall effortlessly. Instantly, Imogen was overcome by the feeling of sorrow. She held Jeffrey tightly and murmured, Jeffrey, you always asked me where your father was. I told you he was the superhero of the central region and he would come to you. Now, it seems that he doesn't care for you and your poor mother after all. It is best now you forget him. Saying this, she carried Jeffrey and walked away. Jeffrey was already afraid of Margaret's aura. Now after hearing Imogen, he understood that the man he hated was his father. He managed to stick his small head out from Imogen's shoulder and stole a glance at Zen. Nathan and Lawson laughed out loud. Although the 10 of them were destined to deal with the crisis of the universe and watch each other's back, secretly they were happy to see Zen getting humiliated in front of everybody. After an awkward silence, Rocher said, Zen, don't worry. Master Yu is just worried about Letitia. It will take her around 10 days to fly down the ascending passageway. When the time comes, we'll go find her together. There is no need to go looking for her, Zen said. I will immediately know it if she returns to this great world. Zen had every faith on the will of the great world and could detect everything that happened in this world. What really troubled him was his son's poor personality. In the meantime, arrangements were done for everyone to stay in Cloud Hall for the time being. Soon the news spread about Zen's return to the Cloud Hall. Many warriors within the central region thronged to meet him. But Zen had no mood to see any of them. He realized that his stay in the lower world was not going to be so easy. Chapter 1427. The Father-Son Talk. For the past few days, Zen had been sitting cross-legged in the ice palace with his eyes closed in rapt attention as he monitored the movements of the entire great world minutely. Even after Zen had ascended to the upper world, he still had a mysterious connection to this great world. It was just that he was unable to transfer power to the great world. On his return, he once again linked to the will of the great world, only to discover that there was a change in this will. The entire great world was rhombus-shaped. If one were to look down at it from a high vantage point, they would see that it looked like a scale of a vicious beast. However, this time, he noticed something strange in it. It seemed that there was an opening on the edge of the great world. As for the will of the great world, even Zen himself wasn't sure what it was exactly. The will of a martial artist was determined by their mental state when they reached a certain goal. Under normal circumstances, that state would be manifested through words and actions. But for the great world, words did not exist. Otherwise, when Zen connected to the will of the great world, it would be able to communicate with him. And as for actions, the only action of the great world was that when Zen was on the Divine Kingdom continent, the great world formed an incarnation, hoping to use it to make up for the ascending passageway. The result, however, was the complete opposite. The will of the great world had been swallowed up by Zen, and the upper world's martial artists had been the ones to repair the ascending passageway. From then on, the will of the great world did not have any actions, it could only help Zen transfer power that hit him. But this time when he returned to the lower world, Zen detected a hint of movement. He didn't know if the barrier of the great world broke by itself, or if there had been a sudden and unexpected issue. The will of the great world had actually entered into the neighboring great world. However, the will that entered the neighboring great world was not widespread. Zen could only sense a small area of the vast sea, and there were some common beasts in the sea. He had never been to any other great world, but he imagined that it would be about the same as this great world. If he had the time, he would want to see the edge of the great world. The barrier was broken, and it seemed as if it was a gateway into another great world. Something like this had never happened before. However, at this stage, he naturally wasn't in the mood to go exploring. After the other godly geniuses had settled down, they decided to walk around. They had never been to the lower world before, and although this place could not compare to the upper world, they were curious about the local customs and traditions of this place. After staying by Zen's side for a day, Margaret decided to go back to the ethereal spirit sect. Her relatives were still in that sect, after all, and now that it had been rebuilt, they were on the verge of gaining prominence. If Margaret returned, it would help the sect much more. After all, she was already at the Soul Sea realm, and, in terms of strength, no one in the great world could be a match for her. On this day, Zen continued to monitor the entire great world. Meanwhile, a small head popped out near the entrance of the palace. A pair of eyes, resembling the eyes of a young Zen, shone with curiosity. Jeffrey's image of his father only existed in his imagination. Although Zen had ascended to the upper world, his stories were already deeply engraved in every corner of the Cloud Hall. As a result, Jeffrey had heard many legends about his father. Once when he was younger, he really wanted to see his father. So he swore that he would ascend to the upper world and go find his father. But now that his father had come back, Jeffrey was greatly disappointed. He had been mercilessly reprimanded when he met his father for the first time. In his young mind, the heroic image of his father had suddenly collapsed, and his father had turned into a terrifying monster. He was not pleased with his father. It had to be known that there was nobody in the Cloud Hall who dared to discipline Jeffrey. Earlier, when Letitia was around, she had been able to control the kid. However, after she ascended, Imogen coddled the little boy. Thus, he had a free rein. In Jeffrey's tiny mind, the only opinion he had of Zen was that he hated him. Still, Zen was his father, and he couldn't suppress his curiosity about him. After being sullen for 2 days, he finally sneaked up to the highest floor of the Cloud Hall and secretly sized up Zen from a corner. Although Zen did not open his eyes, his formless sensing power detected Jeffrey. Jeffrey's figure, appearance and size were all visible in Zen's mind. Zen had to admit that although this child was naughty, he was precocious. His cultivation foundation was quite solid. When he was younger, he could not have caught up with Jeffrey. In the end, the Luo clan was no match for the Cloud Hall in terms of resources. On the other hand, while foundation was important, the arduous efforts of a warrior also played a decisive role. For example, the backgrounds of Nathan, Lucille, and the others were already incomparable in the entire universe. However, this did not mean that they could easily obtain first place. They also needed to cultivate very hard. Zen himself was a fine mix of both and therefore the best example. That was why he felt that he needed to discipline his son and make him an honorable and hardworking person. However, his first interaction with his son had been harsh. He must have been scared out of his wits. In the end, it was still the result of Imogen's pampering. Zen realized he couldn't blame Jeffrey. As he contemplated this, Zen raised his knees slightly, and his figure disappeared from where he sat. Jeffrey's eyes were filled with curiosity. He immediately understood that Zen had sensed him, so he quickly turned around to leave. However, when he looked back, he found that his father was already standing behind him with a kind smile on his face. Although Zen had a smile on his face, the boy still appeared timid. "Jeffrey," Zen called out to him softly. Jeffrey subconsciously replied. His eyes darted around with uncertainty as he said, "Dad." Zen reached out and held Jeffrey in his arms. His mind was flooded with memories of Jeffrey's childhood. If he wanted to, he could find out what had happened in this great world with the help of the world's will. However, this memory belonged to the great world and not to Zen. This strange feeling between him and his son could not be ignored. When he heard Jeffrey call him Dad, a peculiar feeling filled his heart. He grabbed the little boy and said, "I'll take you out." He lovingly placed Jeffrey on his neck, and with a sudden flash, he flew into the sky. Although all the warriors in the Cloud Hall took great care of Jeffrey, none of them were his father. At this moment, Jeffrey sensed a completely different feeling, one that he had never had before. Ha ha, he laughed gleefully. Zen soared across the air and they quickly closed in on the enchanted barrier above the Cloud Hall. "We're about to collide," Jeffrey shrieked. He was very familiar with this enchanted barrier. This one looked like a layer of water, but it would be bad to collide with the barrier. "Close your eyes," Zen instructed. Chapter 14:28, Injury. The blazing white light appeared, and the power of the space law enveloped them both. Jeffrey shut his eyes tight, and when he opened them again, he could only see a trace of a blazing white light around him. The power of the space law had already started to dissipate. Zen and Jeffrey had already penetrated the enchanted barrier by now. "My master has told me that the light of water is so powerful that even someone who is proficient in the space law can't penetrate it," Jeffrey recited. "Master? Which master?" Zen asked, curious. "My master's surname is Zong," Jeffrey replied. Zen immediately knew the master Jeffrey was referring to. It was Felix, the chief rune expert of the Cloud Hall. Zen hadn't expected Felix to be the one to have imparted the divine texture skill to Jeffrey. Wow, so high, so high. Zen flew higher and higher, leaving the clouds far below. They looked like white sea water, rolling slowly beneath him. Jeffrey cried out excitedly, completely forgetting about how terrifying Zen was. "Father, if we keep flying like this, can we reach the upper world?" Jeffrey asked suddenly. Zen thought for a moment, and then replied with a slow smile taking its place on his face, "Sure. If one could withstand the ravages of the strong gales, they actually could go all the way up into the universe. Grandma said that mother has gone to the upper world. If we keep flying like this, will we be able to find my mother?" Jeffrey asked again. This child's thoughts. Zen smiled faintly. If they didn't go through the ascending passageway and ascended through the space of the universe, it would take a lot of time for an ordinary Soul Sea Realm warrior to reach the nearest supreme world. But whatever it was, the little guy was still too young and Zen would obviously not explain all of this to him. He only smiled and said, "Your mother will come back." "When will mother be back?" Jeffrey asked, his eyes lighting up. Zen stared into the distance, to the end of the sea of clouds, and then answered firmly, "It shouldn't be too long. You will definitely meet her in half a month." Zen hoped that Letitia would not encounter something bad or stray into dangerous areas while she traveled through the ascending passageway. At this thought, he remembered the terrible backside of the universe with a jolt. If the universe were to be dissected, space would be divided into the front side and the back side. The back side was not an independent world, but it complemented the familiar space of the world as a shadow followed the person. But a vast majority of creatures did not like living on the backside where sunlight could not reach. There was no life vitality there, nor were there living beings. It was empty. The sorcerer race was the only race that lived at the backside of the world. This race was too mysterious. There had been a supreme lord who had investigated them before, but had come up empty-handed. What was more, he had gotten into a lot of trouble, the least of which were the countless small skulls that covered his body. These skulls hadn't caused any damage to the Supreme Lord, but no one had been able to destroy or even remove them. The Supreme Lord had, in the end, used a complicated method to dispel the curses and banish them. Over time, no one was willing to get into such trouble. What did the sorcerer race rely on to survive? What were they planning? The secrets of this race became more and more mysterious as time passed. The celestial position had recently revealed the news, and only a few of the upper-level masters in the universe knew that this was a conspiracy that had lasted for hundreds of billions of years. Even a supreme lord wouldn't do anything to meddle in the conspiracy because they would be unable to make any changes. This was a game that only true gods and holy beings could participate in. It was a pity that the grand era of the universe was nearing an end. The game was about to start, which was why the situation had become so intense. The universe itself had become more sensitive and powerful, causing talents to appear from everywhere. It was most peculiar in the great world where Zen resided. A warrior with the first-rank purple power body had appeared there. Besides, it also was home to extremely powerful talents like Rocher and Zen. Zen thought it was a coincidence. But the sorcerer race and Master Feng didn't think so. In reality, once Zen had left, Master Feng had already completed the first round of arrangement. Jeffrey ultimately had Zen's blood running through his veins, which was why they'd only needed a few days to get familiar with each other even though it was the first time they had met. The little guy was mischievous, but was also extremely intelligent. He seemed to have countless questions running through his mind. The moment he came to be with Zen, he raised all of the questions one by one. "Dad, why should a warrior cultivate?" Jeffrey asked. The question sounded simple, idiotic, even, but it tugged at Zen's heart, rendering him speechless and wondering how to answer this question. He thought for a moment before smiling and saying, "We cultivate in order to protect the people around us. If there are bad guys bullying you, then I can help you punish them." "But why do warriors have to ascend to the upper world? Isn't this world good?" To Jeffrey, the central region was already huge. It was boundless for mortals and flying into the upper world was not a good choice. The upper world was not a fairyland, but a world where competitions were even crueler. "In order to become stronger," Zen replied. Jeffrey was relentless. "Why do we have to become stronger?" The question was a hard one to answer and soon fell into a cycle of logic. One had to trace back to the first batch of creatures that had been born from the chaos to find the most basic answer. Why would the divine land appear from the chaos? When did the various holy beings in the divine land develop a sense of competition? What kind of an achievement would it be once one had reached the peak of martial arts? Zen would eventually find the answer, but he couldn't answer Jeffrey's question right now. So he answered Jeffrey honestly, "I don't know either." Jeffrey was curious. He thought Zen to be an omnipotent warrior. He hadn't thought that there was something his father didn't know. "I'll tell you when I find out," Jeffrey said seriously, blinking. At Jeffrey's words, Zen suddenly laughed. "Finding the answer to this question is not an easy task," he said, chuckling. "I'm not afraid of difficulties," Jeffrey said, still very serious. Jeffrey had such ambitions at such a young age, which pleased Zen. Jeffrey probably hadn't even understood what he was really looking for. But with this determination, many difficult things would become very easy for him. Days passed in the blink of an eye. On the 12th day, Zen still hadn't detected any fluctuations in the great world. But he hadn't expected Lawson and Nathan to cause trouble. The two of them had gone to the central region, and had been injured when they returned. Lawson had sustained serious injuries, his body covered in thin cuts. It looked like he had been wounded by a sharp weapon. Nathan was also injured and looked to be in a very sorry state. Chapter 1429, An Abnormal Phenomenon. Where have you been?" Zen was dumbstruck. The two of them were at the Spirit Supreme Realm, and they were both godly geniuses. Even Spirit Transformation Realm warriors were no match for them. No one in the central region could have been able to do anything to them. Lawson let out a cold snort, resignedly sitting down, legs crossed to recuperate. If it was any other martial artist who had suffered such an injury, that would be the end of things. But these godly geniuses often carried around holy pills with them. Nathan told Zen the story. "What kind of cursed place is this great world? The further north we went, the stronger the storm was. We could have died inside. I guess they don't call it the chaotic ocean of stars for nothing." The root cause of their injuries started to come to Zen. Since ancient times, there had been an extremely strong storm in the chaotic ocean of stars, but Zen had never known the cause of it. All he knew was that the storm was dangerous, so he had never dared to approach the core of the storm. Even now, he was afraid that he would not be able to weather it. The two of them had been so faithful in their own powers and strength, and upon seeing such a wondrous scene in the lower world, they could not help but venture in to explore. They couldn't have imagined that the further in they went, the more terrifying the wind blades would become. Some wind blades even contained the 8th or 9th layer of the wind law. It was equivalent to a full-force attack from a world lord. How could these two withstand it? Lawson had even used a defensive treasure passed down to him by the Lai clan so he could escape. He lamented that he had used such a great treasure, only to leave with such wounds all over his body. Over the past few days, many people in the central region had asked to visit Zen. There had been people from the World Commercial Alliance, the Ethereal Spirit Sect, and even many from the Cloud Hall, but Zen refused them all. He hadn't wanted to meet with anyone till he knew Letitia was back safely. On the 14th day, there was still no signs of Letitia ever coming back to the great world. The 15th day seemed like any other. In the blink of an eye, half a month had passed since Zen returned to the Cloud Hall to wait for Letitia to return. He was getting more and more agitated. He regretted that the anxiety had taken over him when he was in the celestial position. He should have asked Master Feng to follow them through the ascending passageway, rather than wait at the other end. Worried as he was, he began to get suspicious of what was to come. He knew the people in the upper world had kept a lot of important information from him. Even Lavender had seemed indifferent to him. At this point, Zen had come to rely on himself for any solution as he knew there was no one else who could help. If Letitia had indeed been intercepted by the sorcerers, he would have been waiting all this time in vain. On the 16th day after Zen's return, on the Divine Kingdom continent, the York Divine Kingdom was holding a grand celebration. A new ruler was coming to the throne as his predecessor had already ascended to the upper world. All the martial artists and common citizens of the York Divine Kingdom had come together for the ceremony. The ascending passageway of the Great World was constantly changing its place. When there was a martial artist who was about to ascend, the ascending passageway would move to where the marital artist was. Half a year ago, when Letitia was going to ascend from the central region, it had moved to the place above the central region, near the Cloudy City. And 3 days ago, the former ruler of the York Divine Kingdom ascended to the upper world, and the ascending passageway had moved to the Divine Kingdom continent. The new emperor of the York Divine Kingdom was only at the 6th level of the life and death realm. With the ascending passageway being repaired, the Soul Sea realm martial artists in the Divine Kingdoms all ascended to the upper world, and with that, the 4 Divine Kingdoms' strength had been weakened. All the current rulers were only at the life and death realm, and once they reached the Soul Sea realm, they would be forcibly driven into the ascending passageway by the Great World. As the ruler of the York Divine Kingdom prepared to ascend the throne, a violent phenomenon suddenly appeared in the sky. A large crack extended along the clouds, as if a hidden monster had opened its mouth. Many small black dots suddenly appeared in the crack. They fell to the ground at an extremely fast speed. It's an abnormal phenomenon, Your Majesty. This abnormal phenomenon is a good sign for you to ascend to the throne. This is a good omen. All of you, shut up. The ruler of the York Divine Kingdom, Brennan Liu, gazed at those black spots, and then his complexion suddenly changed. He recognized the black spots were actually many martial artists. Brennan Liu could not clearly see the cultivation levels of these people from this distance, but why were they falling from the sky? These did not seem like friendly people, so how could it be a good omen? Soon, some of the weaker warriors also made it out that the black dots were people that were descending at a rapid speed. Brennan Liu spotted the warrior in the lead. He seemed to be sporting a serious injury. His body was dripping with blood and his aura was starting to falter. Even so, his aura still showed the strength of someone who could easily overpower Brennan. It was unfathomable. This being only needed to lift a finger and he could kill Brennan. As for the warriors that followed him, sure, they seemed a little weaker, but they were undoubtedly warriors of the Soul Sea realm, and there were at least 1,000 of them. Even with their eyes closed, this army would be able to annihilate all 4 divine kingdoms. After all, they were from the upper world. Suddenly, Brennan Liu had a thought. But what were they doing here? What had brought them to the lower world? This does not look right. Some of them are injured, many severely so. Maybe they're escaping something. Brennan Liu was quick in his thinking, and it wasn't long before he saw through to the crux of the matter. The man at the helm of the army was unfathomably powerful, and he had brought a sea of warriors of the Soul Sea realm with him. So the only question remained, who was chasing them? If he and his people got involved, not only the York Divine Kingdom but the entire Divine Kingdom continent and even the entire Great World would be in for a ride of misfortune. Who thought this could be a good omen? As Brennan Liu reprimanded angrily, the civil and military officials who had gathered for the enthronement ceremony completely silenced. Brennan Liu tossed aside the golden crown on his head and flew towards the sky. He knew that if he did not succeed in handling this situation, he wouldn't be able to keep his life, no less, his throne. Besides, he had never taken the throne seriously. He had already reached the 6th level of the life and death realm, and he would soon break through to the Soul Sea realm. Then, he would ascend to the upper world like his father and grandfather had done before him. This was just how it was, the rulers of the 4 divine kingdoms succeeding each other as each generation was ready. After the ascending passageway was repaired, the rulers of the 4 divine kingdoms had changed very frequently. True, the ruler of a divine kingdom probably had not changed for a few thousand years in the past. But now they could ascend to the upper world, and many emperors had chosen to abandon their kingdoms and soar into the upper world less than 2 years after they took their thrones. Chapter 1430, The Divine Kingdom Continent. In the air, Preston covered his mouth with a hand and coughed twice while he was descending from the sky. A pensive look took over his face as several thoughts raced in his mind. The past weeks had been the most challenging period he had to endure so far. The small skulls had been extremely terrifying. When the amount of his life vitality was still sufficient and adequate, Preston could still prevent them from biting him. But eventually, the small skulls managed to devour all his protective life vitality, and chewed his skin, flesh, bones, and internal organs. A small skull even drilled into his internal organs and he had to forcibly dig it out to avoid further damage. He sustained several deep injuries, but Preston, with his strong will, persevered and endured the pain and torment. Casting his gaze down, he caught the trace of what seemed to be a town. "Look, there's a town below, but I don't know which force it belongs to," Preston uttered, pointing a finger at the cluster of houses beneath them. Letitia looked down, her eyes raking over the entire continent. Recognizing the shape of the continent, Letitia knew that the place was not part of the central region. Nodding, she responded, "This is the Divine Kingdom continent. It belongs to the human race." Letitia had never been to the Divine Kingdom continent before, but she remembered that Zen once mentioned that the continent's shape was very unique. In the middle of it was a continental sea, surrounded by the mainland. From above, it looked like the shape of a bracelet. This unique form made it easy for Letitia to ascertain it was indeed the Divine Kingdom continent. "The Divine Kingdom?" Preston asked in surprise, a flash of disdain crossing his face. A divine kingdom could only exist in the lower world, and because of that, there were no divine kingdoms existing in the upper world. The forces, such as the Humanity Alliance and the Thoughtless Minds, would develop into countless 10th-grade sacred places in the end, forming an extremely large and formidable force. Actually, Janet's clan, Lucille's clan, Nathan's clan, and Lawson's clan were like 4 divine kingdoms. However, with the alliance of these 4 great clans, there was no more need to select an emperor to take charge of the Thoughtless Minds, which had successfully developed into an extremely powerful force. Those who possessed true strength didn't need to add the title of War King or War Emperor to their names. They were already considered as the most powerful beings in the universe, and their names were spread out and known by everyone. Besides, the strongest warriors of the universe already had the title of Supreme Lord. "Well, I have sealed those creatures with the heaven-earth sealing skill, so it will take them some time before they can break the seal I placed upon them. Let's rest and recover our strengths first before we make any plans." A considerable number of core disciples from the Pure Jade Sacred Place followed Preston toward the ascending passageway. Although they were yet to be considered as talented and powerful warriors in the universe, they had more than enough potential to grow even stronger and become the main force of the Pure Jade Sacred Place in the future. Preston protected so many core disciples this time, which could be regarded as one of his great achievements in life. Had this occurred in the past, Preston would have felt overjoyed, but he couldn't find it in his heart to feel happy now. He was afraid that the Pure Jade Sacred Place might cease to exist soon, so he found his contribution, albeit great, meaningless. Just as he finished speaking, a figure from the continent below shot up to the skies at a rapid speed to greet him. The stranger was wearing a yellow robe, with an elegant and sophisticated dragon embroidered around the sleeves. Seeing the intricate details of his clothes, both Preston and Letitia figured out that this person was none other than the Divine Kingdom's ruler. "Greetings, I am Brennan Liu. I don't know why you have come to the York Divine Kingdom, but we will do our best to help you out no matter what it is." Despite being the ruler of the York Divine Kingdom, Brennan chose to greet them with respect. He could detect the strength of the newcomers and knew that if he made the wrong move, they could easily wipe out his entire kingdom. But fortunately, these warriors were not interested in destroying the Divine Kingdom. As this was the case, Brennan thought he might as well just treat them with courtesy. If they needed his help, he'd have no choice but to help. But on the off chances that he couldn't, he decided to just be honest with them and politely send them off. Preston kept his silence. Since Letitia hailed from this world, it was better and more fitting if she would manage this. "So this is the York Divine Kingdom. Salutations, I'm Letitia Ning, the leader of Cloud Hall in the Central Region," Letitia replied, bowing her head slightly. "The Central Region." Brennan trailed off, his mind trying to process what she said. "You are Letitia from the Sky Northern Region?" he asked, his eyes widening as surprise flickered on his face. Ever since Zen had made his trip to the Divine Kingdom continent, the 4 Divine Kingdoms had started to place more importance to the Central Region. When the star storm stopped, people from both continents went and visited each other. Due to the storm, it was not very convenient for the citizens to travel back and forth between continents, but the relationship between the people grew much closer than before. Wealthy merchants in the Divine Kingdoms even found business opportunities and took huge risks to cross the chaotic ocean of stars in order to trade their goods. They set up a schedule for the construction of a space channel between the 2 continents to allow easier trading and more convenient travel between merchants. The current power of the Cloud Hall was already comparable to any of the 4 divine kingdoms. Because of its esteemed reputation, it was natural for Brennan to know about the Cloud Hall's leader, Letitia. He didn't expect that the leader of the Cloud Hall would also ascend. Not only that, she even brought 1,000 warriors of the Soul Sea realm and an indistinguishable expert back with her. He tried to figure out her purpose and came up with one guess: they were probably being chased and decided to take refuge in his kingdom. To tell you the truth, there are powerful enemies chasing after us in the ascending passageway. If you will allow us, we wish to stay here for some time. We want to take some rest first before we formulate our new plan, Letitia said politely. Ah, so his guess was correct. Brennan pursed his lips and tried to think of his next course of actions. What should he do now? He knew it was dangerous and wanted them to leave quickly, but he was left with no choice. It seemed Letitia was a bit selfish. The sorcerer race members were indeed mysterious and frightening. If they were lured into the central region, they would no doubt bring trouble and incite chaos in the Cloud Hall. Thus Letitia decided to sacrifice the Divine Kingdom continent instead. Brennan realized her selfish motives and felt anger rising in his chest, but he was helpless and he knew that he could do nothing against these powerful warriors. Masters, this way, please, Brennan said, keeping his tone polite despite the maelstrom of emotions filling his chest. He even addressed them as powerful masters, because that was how they usually called the strongest Soul Sea realm warriors in their continent. The 1,000 warriors, including Letitia and Preston, followed him into the heart of the York Divine Kingdom. Meanwhile, Zen, who was staying at the top of the Cloud Hall, suddenly opened his eyes. When Zen felt a strange phenomenon coming in from the great world, he immediately grasped the memories about Letitia. Letitia's memories on the will of the great world were cut off less than a year ago. As she had ascended at the time, she did not leave any memory mark on the will. But now that she was back, Zen finally managed to capture the memories about her. There was only a small amount of memories about her as it had only recorded the part where Letitia entered the great world and conversed with Brennan, the ruler of the York Divine Kingdom. Fortunately, it was more than enough for Zen to determine her location. Chapter 1431, Kurt's Gaze. Zen had been worried and afraid that the ascending passageway might lead to the distant seas or to the Sea God continent. Even though Zen had arrived at the Spirit Supreme realm, crossing the vast ocean would take him many days. If the pursuers caught up before him, then he might not be able to rescue Letitia in time. However, her being at the Divine Kingdom continent made the situation much better. Let's go, and remember we have to be one united force to fight against them. Zen briefed Roche and the others. Margaret cut short her trip to the ethereal spirit sect and came back early. Although she held some grudges against Letitia, she was more concerned about Zen and knew her help would be required at this hour. At present, Xenia had already gone back to the upper world under Master Feng's command, but Roche, Margaret, Kurt and Lone were on standby, ready to make the move at Zen's command. And so they responded immediately when Zen called out to them. On the other hand, Lawson and Nathan were filled with apprehension. After several days of recuperation, some of their bodily injuries had completely healed, some even disappeared. The effects of the divine medicine of thoughtless minds were incredibly powerful. Initially, they hesitated to follow the others. But after seeing Lucille and the other godly genius decide to follow, they changed their minds. But how could they be willing to work for Zen, as they were not on good terms with him? Zen knew about their feelings but did not give it much thought. He ordered his men to create a gap in the light of water to fly out. "Father, please wait, I will also accompany you," Jeffrey shouted as he came running out. Since he was unable to fly, he jumped around, waving his hand frantically. "Jeffrey, listen to me. You should stay back and take care of the people at Cloud Hall. Master Yu, please take him inside," Zen said gravely. Zen knew that the fairy palace was the safest place for Jeffrey. But looking at his spirit, Zen realized he wouldn't be able to keep Jeffrey at the palace for too long. And right now, he only trusted Imogen to take care of Jeffrey. Even though Imogen held her grudge against Zen, she tried her best to pacify Jeffrey at the moment. Zen swiftly turned into a streak of light and flew out, followed by Roche, Margaret and Lone. Lucille was floating in front of Nathan and Lawson. She swept her gaze across them and asked, "Have you guys forgotten your patriarch's instructions?" Nathan understood what Lucille was referring to, and retorted, "Humph, you should have supported me." Lucille firmly shook her head. "I will only support the one who takes the first place. You lost it to him in the end. Deal with it." "That was because I did not use my full strength," Nathan said bitterly. It was a sensitive topic for Nathan and he still showed his resentment about it. It was clear how unrecognized he had been at that time. You still lost to him, and that is what matters. Maybe even Zen had not used his full strength, Lucille said with a smirk. Nathan pursed his lips and let out a long sigh as he got up. Lawson shook his head, feeling equally miserable. Soon the three of the thoughtless minds followed Zen. At the other corner of the Cloud Hall, Lewis and Patrick were seen squatting by the side, staring at the light beams that flashed past the sky above them. Zen did not even acknowledge our presence. Lewis' expression turned sour. Didn't Rocher mention it before? Since the time Zen had arrived at Cloud Hall, he was not in the mood to meet and greet guests. So obviously even you come under that list. He didn't have the time to meet everyone. I have a feeling there is an imminent danger lurking around the corner, Patrick said with a look of concern. If there is danger we will definitely help him, but only when he asks us. Lewis continued to be in a bad mood. Patrick gave a faint smile and said, look at those warriors. They have reached a higher level than the Soul Sea realm. They are the warriors of the Spirit Supreme realm, ever ready to protect us. You want to help them or trouble them? Lewis pursed his lips and kept quiet. He wanted to refute Patrick's words, but he was right. Moreover, there was a huge difference between their strengths. How could he possibly help them? Maybe I can show them how to run for one's life, he thought with a bitter laugh. Lewis' eyes were still fixed on the sky when he noticed one ray of light among the others suddenly stop. It was that of a young monk. He seemed to have sensed something and turned to directly look at them. It was nearly impossible to locate Lewis and Patrick as they were standing in a very remote corner. And yet the young monk saw them. Lewis found that to be a strange coincidence. He patted Patrick's shoulder and told him, look over there. Why is your companion looking at us? What do you mean by, your companion? Patrick said with a look of distress. What, you forgot? You are the reincarnation of a monk, just like him. Lewis chuckled. If he had told this to Rocher, Lewis would have been in great trouble. But Patrick had a very gentle personality and did not know to rebuke back. I don't know about that, but I have a feeling that monk is quite special, Patrick stated, though he was also puzzled. The Buddhist sects in the central region were not flourishing well and few of them were only in the 3rd grade. Moreover, Cloud Hall's cultivation methods were not really suitable for Patrick to practice. What he did not know was that there was a famous blessed Buddhist land in the universe. The young monk who had stopped in midair was Kurt. Kurt was about to follow Zen, when his heart began to beat strangely and a sense of intimacy rose within him. Curious, he turned his head and his gaze pulled towards Patrick. Kurt had a pensive look on his face. While Zen and others departed, he thought the man he looked at would not leave Cloud Hall soon. He would first settle the matter for Zen. In the clear sky above the central region, 8 figures soon turned into thin lines and quickly escaped into the distance. Under Zen's direction, they headed north. The speed of these 8 people was unfathomable. They swiftly crossed the central region and entered the chaotic ocean of stars in no time. Pausing for a brief moment, Zen looked at the storm that was raging in the chaotic ocean of stars. If they were to pass through this storm, there was a high level of risk for Zen and the others. At any cost, they had to avoid the core of the chaotic ocean of stars if they had to be safe. Do we have to directly cross over it? There must be some other way, Lawson asked fearfully as he thought about their earlier experience. Earlier, to avoid the storm in the chaotic ocean of stars, the team of the Celestial Position had chosen a path on the back of the space. However, on their way through the back, they had a nasty encounter with the Shadow Race, also known as the Sorcerer Race. Zen closed his eyes to have a clear vision of the Divine Kingdom continent. He could see that Letitia had settled down in the Divine Kingdom continent and was currently resting. She did not seem like she would leave immediately. He contemplated that there was still plenty of time. This way, Zen transformed himself into a beam of light and quickly advanced towards the northwest direction. Although the chaotic ocean of stars looked terrifying, it was still possible to cross as long as one did not go near the core. They had to make a detour to avoid getting sucked into the powerful storm right at the center. Even though the detour would cost extra time, it was a much safer option. Back at the Divine Kingdom continent, over 1,000 core disciples of the pure jade sacred place were living in the Imperial Palace. Most of the people focused on healing their wounds. The ancient sorcerer race were not very strong with their fighting skills. The worrisome part was that after killing these creatures, their curse would still remain. Those little skulls would be like a nightmare that would wrap around a warrior until one died. There simply seemed to be no solution to get out of it. Chapter 1432, Daredevils. Bam! Preston's punch hit them with a powerful force and sent the small skulls flying at a fast hurling speed. The terrifying strength of a powerful and esteemed warrior at the spirit transformation realm was more than enough to send the small skulls millions of feet away. Once they were gone, Preston's shoulders sagged in relief. With a swift movement of his hand, Preston took out 2 life vitality jades and crushed them before absorbing them quickly. He then took out 3 emerald green pills and swallowed them all in one gulp. Their effects were immediate, and he could feel the warm rush of his energy quickly returning to him. "Where are we going after this?" Preston asked, raising his brows inquisitively. As a powerful master at the spirit transformation realm, Preston should have made the decision by himself. However, as he faced the sorcerer race, whose existence was a mystery in itself, he began to feel lost and confused and decided to ask Letitia about her plans. When Letitia suggested they should return to the lower world, Preston immediately thought that it was a wise decision. The supreme worlds were in chaos and only the lower world remained unaffected by the disarray. They could find solace there. What they didn't expect, however, was the fact that the sorcerer race would still pursue them relentlessly. Preston was puzzled. Their purpose didn't make any sense to him. There was no one in the group important enough to attract them, so why would the sorcerer race want to hunt them down? Moreover, the time and place that this horde of sorcerer warriors chose to appear were very strange and suspicious. The sorcerer warriors were already there at the ascending well when they arrived, as though they had been guarding there and waiting for them all this time. Letitia shook her head in confusion. "I didn't expect that these sorcerer warriors would suddenly appear at the ascending well. It's impossible that their intention was to try and stop us there." "Yes, I also think so," Preston agreed with Letitia's conjecture. Looking at this from another perspective, if this group of warriors from the sorcerer race have been guarding the ascending well, then there must be something important underneath the ascending well. Beneath the ascending well was the ascending passageway, which connected the great world below. In other words, the sorcerer race must be guarding something from this great world. That would explain their strange actions. "I remember now. I think there are sorcerer race members in the great world," Letitia added, deep in thought. "Really?" Preston's eyes widened in surprise. Letitia nodded firmly. "My husband mentioned that he had encountered the members of the sorcerer warriors twice. The real strength of the sorcerer race is almost exponential and immeasurable. What's the point of hiding in the great world?" Preston asked, his face becoming grim as a frown took over his face. Preston originally brought Letitia with him to keep them away from danger, but now, it seemed like they had run into an even greater danger. But they were desperate and choosing to flee to the lower world was the only right choice at that moment. They had no other choice then. The problem now is what they should do about the sorcerer warriors that were chasing after them like wild ferocious animals. After getting enough rest, Preston recovered 70% of his strength. But it was not sufficient enough to drive all the small skulls away. If this kept up, they would surely die a slow gruesome death. If only a supreme lord would come around and help them. That would be their only chance to survive. Going back to the ascending passageway and returning to the supreme world was out of the equation, too. It wouldn't work as they were likely to die first before they could even reach the passageway. Regardless whether the sorcerer warriors that invaded the pure jade sacred place had been cleared or not, if they tried to return to the ascending passageway, their pursuers would definitely catch up and eliminate them before they could make a move. They were really caught in a dilemma right now. Letitia sighed, feeling weary and hopeless. "Let's just move on and see what our fates have in store for us." She bit her lip, fighting back the urge to cry. She really wanted to return to the Cloud Hall to see Imogen and her son, Jeffrey, whom she missed every day, but she was left with no plausible options. At this moment, she couldn't see any way out of this dilemma. In fact, when she traveled down the ascending passageway with the sorcerer warriors giving chase from behind, she worried about the ramifications of her actions. The great world wasn't big. Would it bring trouble to the central region if she led these warriors into the great world? She could choose to retreat, or even die in the ascending passageway, but it was impossible for Preston and the 1,000 core disciples of the pure jade sacred place to make such a debilitating sacrifice. Letitia's mind was in extreme disarray. She had no idea how she should deal with this situation. She tried to come up with solutions, only to draw a blank. Instead, she became even more confused. She sat on the ground, her slender arms wrapping around her knees protectively as desperation filled her chest. She buried her head in her chest, letting out the tears that welled in her eyes. Once again, she was helpless, with no one by her side to help her out. She'd never felt as alone as she had now. Zen was probably still in the upper world. Meanwhile, caravans lined the passageways as all sorts of different materials from the York Divine Kingdom were shipped into the palace. Many of these items were precious materials that the York Divine Kingdom had accumulated for countless of years. Some of them had been sent here from the other 3 divine kingdoms, as they had also learned about the arrival of the warriors from the upper world. The 4 divine kingdoms were in the same continent, so they knew they couldn't just sit by and do nothing. When these supplies were sent to the palace to be given away to the warriors from the upper world, Brennan's heart sank. There was a 10,000-year-old fleece flower root, a 100,000-year-old blood moon crystal, and even a bundle of various precious herbs. All of them were priceless. However, very quickly, Brennan's face cleared, as the things that he sent in were not of any interest to them. Only a few of them randomly chose some materials. Most of them only picked up some items, took a look and then threw them to the side. Knowing this, Brennan felt a little disappointed. After all, these people were important figures from the upper world. He thought that if he could establish good relationship with them now, then there was a high chance that he could benefit from them in the future once he ascended to the upper world. However, what Brennan did not know was that there were a lot of supreme worlds connected to the ascending passageway of the Great World. Even if he did manage to ascend to the upper world in the future, the chances of him landing in the pure jade sacred place were slim and very small. Sitting on a high platform, Preston turned his attention to the core disciples who were quietly resting below. Seeing their looks of defeat frustrated him and awakened his desire to find a way out of their current predicament. Out of the blue, a look of determination flashed across his face as he clenched his fists. Conviction flared deep in his chest. He was still one of the top warriors within the entire pure jade sacred place. There was no way he would sit back and wait for their impending death. Preston abruptly rose to his feet and, with a deep breath, shouted, "Everyone!" All the core disciples were startled and directed their eyes toward Preston, who looked at them with fire burning in his eyes. Chapter 1433, Counterattack. The core disciples of the pure jade sacred place boasted of extraordinary talents and backgrounds. There were some disciples whose backgrounds were even stronger than Preston's, but now that they had fallen into such a predicament, they had no option but to view Preston as their leader. "The sorcerer race isn't as strong as we think," Preston said loudly. Everyone nodded in agreement. They were fully aware of what Preston had said. In terms of strength, the sorcerer race was not very powerful. Warriors at the Soul Sea realm could easily kill them. But no one knew the methods that the sorcerer race adopted. When ordinary creatures were killed, they would release malicious auras as their curses. However, the curses of the sorcerer race were small skulls that could not be gotten rid of. Those skulls were like incurable diseases. Whoever was infected with the skulls would die without exception. "We will require a group of expendable soldiers to kill the sorcerer race. Only then can the others survive." After a pause, Preston continued, "Those who are willing to take up this mission, please step forward." There was pin-drop silence in the luxuriantly green square in the palace. There had been discussions on this proposal from Preston before. The core disciples were relatively young. The scene of many people in the underground palace being bitten into pieces and devoured by the small skulls still stayed fresh in their minds. They could not get the picture out of their minds and trembled at the thought of it. In their hearts, they knew that killing the sorcerer race was tantamount to committing suicide. Therefore, no one was ready to attack the sorcerer race on the way down the ascending passageway. Preston had temporarily managed to seal those creatures, giving a chance for others to escape. But now, if no one was willing to fight the sorcerer race, everyone would die. Perhaps Preston's attitude had an effect on some people, or perhaps they truly had no other way out. After a moment of silence, someone finally walked up to the stage and stood beside Preston. It was a martial artist wearing a black robe. Preston walked up to him and gave him a hug. He was an outstanding martial artist of the pure jade sacred place, trained with great care. Yet, now he had to become an expendable soldier. The second martial artist walked up to the stage. So did the third one. Gradually, more and more martial artists gathered on the stage. Soon, more than 300 people had gathered around Preston. The remaining 700 people in the square couldn't make up their minds. Everyone's understanding of life was different, so it was not easy to make such a decision. Preston didn't force them. Deep in his heart, he wanted to keep as many martial artists as possible. "It's enough. These 300 expendable soldiers are more than enough. Now all of you listen to me very carefully. I will set up the Sky Demon eliminating array. All you need to do is guard the 300 important positions." It was obvious that Preston was under great pressure in this counterattack, because he would have to bear the brunt of most of the sorcerer race's curses. He guided the team on how to guard the important positions. They came from the pure jade sacred place, and the array that Preston was telling them to set up was the same as that of the inheritance of the pure jade sacred place, so they mastered in no time. Seeing what unfolded in front of her, Letitia held these warriors in high esteem. Although they were core disciples, they were not prominent in the universe. But in desperate situations, the power they showed couldn't be ignored. It could be considered the force of human nature. If they could eliminate the sorcerer race here, they would have better chances of surviving. Even in the 4 divine kingdoms, everyone was panic-stricken. The elders of the divine kingdoms all understood what was happening. The powerhouses that came out of nowhere seemed to have caused a lot of trouble. But they didn't have the slightest chance of resisting. They couldn't just kick those troublemakers out, right? Who would dare to persuade them to leave? Before they knew, 12 hours had passed. Suddenly, a huge crack appeared in the sky. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Numerous tiny black dots were visible from the crack. They rapidly started falling from the sky and began to grow bigger. The divine kingdom citizens looked up at the sky with great curiosity. They quickly discovered that these descending objects were actually massive skulls. Boom! A giant skull released a black bolt of lightning as it smashed into the ground hard, creating a deep crater. Then black shadows began to crawl out from the skull one after another. Around the skull were many divine kingdom martial artists. As they saw this, they didn't even dare to breathe. The terrifying looks of the black shadows left them overwhelmed by terror. Oddly enough, the members of the sorcerer race didn't even look at those martial artists and directly headed towards the royal palace of York Divine Kingdom. They aimed at the people from the pure jade sacred place only, and they had no interest in the people of the Divine Kingdom continent. Here they are. At this moment, Preston was standing at the very top of the palace of York Divine Kingdom. He brought his hands together and a scorching white stream of space power drew out horizontal and vertical lines, spreading out from his body. Soon, the lines enveloped the 300 expendable soldiers. Chapter 1434. The Terrifying Skulls. Letitia and the remaining 700 core disciples retreated into the depths of the palace. Preston had already confided to Letitia that it was his mission to protect her life. If he couldn't fight off the sorcerer race's attack on his own, he had hoped that Letitia could get herself to safety. Letitia was moved by these words. She and Preston were not particularly close. As for Preston, he only risked his life to protect her because it was ordered by the Saint Lord of the Pure Jade Sacred Place. He was very dedicated to his mission. When the sorcerer race arrived, the entire Pure Jade Sacred Place was probably completely destroyed. Preston might have realized this much sooner than she did. Within the vicinity of the Imperial Palace of the York Divine Kingdom, giant skulls continued to smash down. The sorcerer race wasn't interested much in the warriors of the Great World, so there wasn't a mass massacre. Only a few unlucky ones were smashed to death by the giant skulls. The jagged black figures left the skulls and headed towards the palace. Brennan had preemptively ordered the royal family's members to escape from the Imperial Palace. Currently, he floated high above the city and observed the entire place. What kind of monsters are they? The terrifying creatures advanced towards the palace in all sorts of strange postures, forming a dark wave that quickly surged from all directions. The horrific sight made Brennan worry. The only consolation that he got was that these monsters headed straight towards the palace. It seemed obvious that they only targeted Letitia and the people who stayed with her. They didn't harm the citizens of the York Divine Kingdom. A trace of hope bloomed in Brennan's heart. He wished that these monsters would directly leave after they fulfilled their mission of killing those powerful martial artists. They are coming. Preston, who was positioned in the middle, suddenly roared. The 7 white conical crystals, placed neatly in front of him, suddenly exploded. Buzz, buzz, buzz. The sky demon eliminating array suddenly fired a blazing white light. The beams of white light flowed out and traced the perimeter of the palace walls. They adorned the entire palace and made it look as if it was a dreamland. All of the 300 warriors of the Soul Sea realm stood at their respective posts and released their life vitality simultaneously. Their movement speed increased exponentially. As he faced the first wave of the sorcerer warriors, Preston extended his hand and clapped. Crack! A thunderous fluctuation was released from the center of the sky demon eliminating array, which was directly in front of Preston. As the fluctuation spread out, the space it passed through was folded. The sky demon eliminating array was arranged by utilizing the principles of the space law. As the one operating the array, Preston could be considered as powerful as a world lord at the moment. A space which was 10 foot long could be folded into a 1 foot long space. After being folded and compressed, everything within the space would be deformed and destroyed. It looked like a door that was continuously being squeezed, shooting forwards continuously. The door passed through the palace walls, and the entire wall was instantly compressed, its size rapidly reduced. The wall that was originally half a meter in width became as thick as a pancake. It was a very bizarre sight. Though the wall looked like a thin piece of cake, it actually retained its sturdiness as it was squeezed firmly. It was still a wall, just made thinner. The wall was a lifeless object. It only deformed when it was squeezed. However, it was a different matter for living beings. The neatly trimmed grass and nearby plants were liquefied into a green ooze that flowed all over the ground. The trees transformed into planks with unusual shapes, which collapsed on the ground. As for the members of the sorcerer race, they were all crushed into pieces, and turned to fragments of black paper, scattered on the ground. It was as if there was a huge monster that had been squashed by someone. With things turning out the way they did, it seemed that the sorcerer creatures would definitely be destroyed. However, the 300 warriors and Preston did not seem excited at all. Killing the sorcerer creatures was an easy task, but it was their curses that gave everyone a cause to be worried. Cough, KOF, KOF. Indeed, as they looked on, small skulls emerged from their squashed bodies, jawbones clattering as they swooped straight towards Preston. All of the martial artists present weren't cowards, as they were not afraid of the ordinary skulls. But now in their eyes, these small skulls were like evil spirits which would kill everyone. Idiot off. Preston unleashed his full power, and he brimmed with an imposing aura. He used the power of the Sky Demon eliminating array to strike back at the skulls. After all, his strength was comparable to a world lord's as he used the Sky Demon eliminating array. He wanted to see for himself if he could use the array to annihilate these annoying small skulls. The wave of compressing force once again headed towards the small skulls. Chapter 1435, Desperate Resistance. Boom, boom, boom. With the space being folded and compressed, the sound of the explosions was very clear. Everyone could see that many fine cracks had appeared around the small skulls. These were the cracks of space. This space did not crush the small skulls. Instead, cracks appeared on its own. No, perhaps having foreseen this scene before, Preston didn't change his expression at all. With a flip of his hand, he sent a dozen of small skulls flying. His gaze once again focused straight ahead, and more sorcerer race members came forth. Come on. With a wave of his hand, Preston sent another 2 space fluctuations toward the skulls. The Sky Demon eliminating array was a kind of collective. The warriors of the Soul Sea realm only needed to distribute their life vitality according to the directions given by Preston. The biggest flaw of the Sky Demon eliminating array was in fact Preston himself. As long as he didn't fall, the entire array would be locked down by space and the 300 warriors of the Soul Sea realm would be safe. Crash, boom, bang. A shattering sound was let out once again. Creatures from the sorcerer race who had dared to attack were all compressed into a thin piece of black paper and piled up on the ground in all sorts of strange shapes. However, all the dead life forms turned into small skulls that raced towards them. The small skulls got dispersed by Preston's slap, but no matter how far away they were thrown, they would still turn back unhesitatingly and attack them. The more creatures died, the more skulls there would be. There was one wave of skulls, followed by a second wave. 45 small skulls had already gathered around them. As Preston's number of kills increased, the number of small skulls also increased subsequently by leaps and bounds. Not long after, over 100 small skulls were randomly flying in the air. Preston was still able to manage such a large number of skulls. But an hour later, thousands of small skulls had infiltrated the air. These skulls were like garbage in an ocean. As they collided together, crunching sounds echoed through the air. Just a glance at them was enough to send shivers down one's spine. Most of the small skulls were racing towards Preston to bite him. Some were dashing to bite the ablaze white lines that were condensed by the space law, outside of the Sky Demon eliminating array. Although the 300 warriors of the Soul Sea knew that they were doomed to die, their faces turned pale when they saw a myriad of small skulls. Some people were standing on the periphery of the array, and the small skulls were only inches away from them. Preston had said that these skulls would be unable to break the array as long as he didn't collapse, but warriors still couldn't help but panic. Fortunately, they didn't need to do much in this array. As long as they could spend life vitality in accordance to the established rhythm, it would be enough. If it were some other array where they needed to coordinate with each other, it would have probably collapsed long ago. But as the small skulls continued biting, the life vitality of the array kept getting consumed. Everyone felt that Preston was frantically using up their life vitality. At this rate, it wouldn't be long before their life vitality sea would dry up. Bang, bang, bang. Warriors constantly crushed the life vitality jades in their hands, and began to replenish the life vitality before it all ran out. The more small skulls there were, the more they would bite and the faster their life vitality would be consumed. It was actually possible that the sky demon eliminating array would eventually be destroyed by the small skulls. An hour later, over 10,000 small skulls had accumulated in front of them. These skulls danced in the air, covering the skies. They were sent flying by Preston and scattered everywhere. However, they were like maggots, regrouping and diving down once more to continue devouring the sky demon eliminating array. I can't resist anymore. A core disciple had an extremely weak complexion. He sat down on the ground, but the soul sea within his body was still dried up. My life vitality jade is used up. Another warrior fell down. With every warrior that fell, the burden on the remaining warriors increased. The speed at which life vitality was extracted would also become faster, and the complexion of Preston grew more and more unsightly. When the sky demon eliminating array collapsed, people would be nibbled away into a pile of meat by these small skulls in a short period of time. Is this resistance futile in the end? As Preston saw the waves of skulls, his heart sank. It wouldn't even take 5 minutes before all of their life vitality was sucked dry by these wretched things. Just then, a group of core disciples, which had been hiding in the depths of the palace, appeared behind the sky demon eliminating array. Preston, we have come to help you, Letitia's voice sounded suddenly. The helplessness and sadness on her incomparably beautiful face had faded away, and it was replaced by a resolute expression. The core disciples following Letitia all wore the same expression on their faces. Chapter 1436, Desperate Situation. The air was filled with tense chaos. At that moment, the entire sky demon eliminating array was under tremendous pressure. More and more martial artists continued to lose their life vitality, but Preston knew that there was no way back. They had little time left. As soon as the sky demon eliminating array collapsed, all the small skulls would attack and tear them into pieces. Just then, Preston saw Letitia and the warriors following behind her. You can just leave, he coldly said to Letitia. All resistance was futile at that point. Although Letitia had brought 700 warriors with her to help, their life vitality would eventually be depleted. It still wouldn't flip the tide to their favor, and in the end, the sky demon eliminating array would still collapse and they would all die. However, where would Letitia go? Preston didn't know as well. Perhaps the purpose of the sorcerer warriors was to capture all the warriors who came here from the upper world in one fell swoop. If so, then Letitia still wouldn't be able to escape in this great world. Where could I go? Letitia asked. She, like Preston, also didn't know. There was nowhere she could escape. Even if she left right now, doing so would only buy her a little more time. Moreover, she also had other concerns. She was afraid she'd cause a disaster to the central region, and fail to resist the temptation of returning to the Cloud Hall. Preston was silent. Soon enough, he smiled bitterly and said, fine. He then waved his hand and a blaze white lines appeared behind him, which formed multiple squares. The squares wrapped around Letitia and spread outwards. After a while, all the 700 warriors were individually wrapped in the array. I need your life vitality, Preston shouted. In compliance, the life vitality sea in the bodies of Letitia and all the martial artists stirred up. The surging life vitality sea waves swept out and followed the sky demon eliminating array's space patterns, then gathered on Preston's body. Thus, the previously almost dried up sky demon eliminating array had now regained its lost vigor. Some of the space patterns had tiny holes from when the small skulls had bitten them. When the life vitality flowed through them, the gaps began to mend themselves and forcefully pushed out the small skulls. Go die already, Preston yelled coldly. Once again, he forcefully struck out with his palm. He figured that since he'd die anyway, he should kill to his heart's content. Meanwhile, Brennan dumbfoundedly watched the scene unfold in front of him up in the sky. He wasn't the only one who saw it. The rulers of the Wind Divine Kingdom, the Harlem Divine Kingdom, and the Starfield Divine Kingdom had also arrived and witnessed it. They watched the war closely in the royal palace, worry evident on their faces. After all, the war was right in the Divine Kingdom continent. Just how strong is that person in the array? Our Divine Kingdom continent does not have tablets of high-level space law to cultivate, but there are records of the high-level space law. The space folding is something of the 8th layer or the 9th layer of the space law. Is this person a world lord from the legends? It was known that the 4 divine kingdoms had some connections with the upper world. In addition, the secret sect in the thoughtless minds which absorbed people's faith energy also had their branch in the Divine Kingdom continent. Thus, they had also heard about the matters of the upper world. I'm afraid that, if a world lord is being hunted, then what exactly did happen in the upper world? Several rulers were shocked at their realization. However, their guess about Preston's cultivation was wrong. Since Preston himself didn't have the ability to control space folding, he relied on the Sky Demon eliminating array to perform such a technique. On the other hand, he was able to keep the small skulls away because his strength was comparable to that of a world lord. He wouldn't have unleashed such great power without the Sky Demon eliminating array. At the same time, the Sky Demon eliminating array's magic needed a huge amount of life vitality from many Soul Sea realm martial artists. Those two elements combined formed what many had seen as Preston's power, and such power was unsustainable. More sorcerer warriors continued to die, while the small skulls multiplied. The small, pesky skulls flew everywhere. What was worse was that as long as they were near the Sky Demon eliminating array, they crazily bit on everything. I am losing my life vitality so fast. Letitia's lips curved down into a frown. The life vitality C in her body decreased rapidly as well. She wasn't considered strong as she had less life vitality in her soul C than the core disciples of the pure jade sacred place. She didn't look too good, and the other warriors weren't much better. After all, the number of small skulls had doubled and the Sky Demon eliminating array had to bear double the pressure. After just an hour, many of the warriors had consumed more than half of their life vitality in their life vitality C. Some martial artists tried to meditate on the spot and absorb the vitality between heaven and earth for their own use, but the vitality in the lower world was far inferior to that of the upper world. Moreover, even to absorb the vitality between heaven and earth in the upper world would be far from enough. Unless they had an infinite supply of life vitality jades, they might not be able to sustain balance. Another hour had passed. About 40,000 skulls had now swarmed the place. The massive influx of small skulls were like sharp blades that floated above everyone's heads. Once they exhausted their life vitality, the small skulls would suddenly chop down like guillotines. The people would surely die. Meanwhile, Letitia quietly crushed a supreme life vitality crystal. If even the life vitality jades weren't enough to replenish her life vitality, what more could the life vitality crystals do? It was like a single drop of water in the life vitality sea that had dried up completely. She wasn't the only one. The soul seas of all the warriors at the Soul Sea realm were also drained. Amidst the desperate situation, all eyes turned to Preston. Chapter 1437, The Powerful Sword Strike. Preston smiled bitterly. As a spirit transformation realm martial artist, he had produced a massive number of living creatures in his inner world. The proof of it was a small divine kingdom with several third-grade sacred places where countless creatures still lived. Just now, a massive calamity had erupted in his inner world. He had cruelly disintegrated all living beings and returned them to the life vitality. Houses, buildings, roads, lakes, wolves, snakes, tigers, leopards, and any other vicious beasts in his inner world, none of them were spared. Some of the virtual tribulation realm and life and death realm warriors had also been restored to the life vitality by him. These creatures were deeply unwilling at the moment. They did not know what was happening outside of this world, nor did they know that the master of this inner world was undergoing a life and death crisis. Therefore, he had no choice but to sacrifice them one by one. When some warriors built their inner worlds, they sometimes developed bonds with the creatures within. For instance, once when Preston had been roaming his inner world, he had accepted a disciple. With his support, the disciple had established a powerful force in the inner world. But now, everything in this inner world would be destroyed soon and restored to the purest life vitality. The creatures were forced to comply to it as Preston was their god. Preston was also reluctant to take this step, but he felt he had no other choice left. His life vitality was used up and he knew that there was no longer any reason for him to persevere. Crack! As the loud sound rang out, an enormous crack appeared in the Sky Demon eliminating array. When the small skulls saw this, they rushed in through the crack. Get away! Preston had almost completely exhausted his last bit of life vitality. He struck out with his palm, sending the small skulls flying. However, even more small skulls poured in. Despair appeared on the faces of the others. Still, the expression on Letitia's face was abnormally calm. She was deep in rumination, missing many she had known, such as Jeffrey, Imogen, Cloud Hall. However, her greatest concern was still her husband. Perhaps she should not have run around like this. Instead, she should have stayed in the great world and waited for Zen to return. With his ability, one day he would return to Cloud Hall. Zen had only left for about 7 years, and to a martial artist, it was only a short period of time. Regret did not do her any good. Slowly, she tied her hair into a bun and watched the Sky Demon eliminating array collapse. More and more small skulls fell toward the crowd. Everyone seemed far too calm. Their life vitality had almost run out earlier, and now they were able to hold on just by means of their last strands. Now, even if they wanted to run, they could no longer do so. Who would have thought that after half a month of escaping, their fates would come to an end here? Helplessness struck them. Just 1 month ago, the pure jade sacred place had been prosperous. Now in the blink of an eye, all kinds of calamities had occurred in the universe. The creatures sighed in their hearts at the transience of the world. The crack on the array grew larger and larger as more and more small skulls began to pour in, all charging toward Preston. With Preston's death, the array would crumble. There was no way for anyone to survive. However, right at this moment, a sharp cry suddenly resounded in everyone's ears. Whoosh! A sword beam, emanating a dangerous aura, shot straight down from the skies. The sword strike contained a terrible power. The sword light converged and then suddenly exploded. The small skulls were blasted away under its strength and scattered in all directions. Preston should have been able to do the same, especially by means of the Sky Demon eliminating array. His strength was comparable to a world lord's and he could have knocked the small skulls far away. However, he was still unable to destroy them completely, so the number of skulls continued to increase. Is it that someone came here to help us? Preston, who had given up by now, raised his head to look up at the skies. The power of the sword strike was akin to that of a spirit transformation realm warrior. It was by no means the kind of power that a warrior from this world could manifest. The warriors raised their heads and saw 8 beams of light rapidly approach from the skies. Whoosh! The small skulls had managed to gather together. Now, the second sword strike pierced through the air and shot at them once again. The sword ray drew a straight line in the air, diffusing great radiance. Once again, it sent the small skulls away. Letitia raised her head and looked up at the sky. As she saw the man at the helm, her eyes twinkled with astonishment, tears starting to roll down her cheeks. She had been imagining and wishing that Zen would come to her like a heavenly soldier, appearing in front of her out of the blue to save her from her current predicament. But the universe was so vast, how could Zen have known that she was in danger? Letitia had later dismissed her daydream and secretly laughed at herself, deeming it as only wishful thinking. Zen was not an omnipresent true God anyway. He could not control everything. However, in the end, he appeared when she was right on the verge of despair. Letitia did not know if Zen could handle the small skulls, but she believed that since Zen had shown up, he would be able to come up with a solution. She trusted him fully and had great confidence in him. To her, being able to meet Zen at this moment was worth all the turmoil she had to face, even if she had to die the next moment. She had missed him dearly for several years. Now, she was finally meeting him again. It fulfilled her ardent wish, which might in fact be her last. In an instant, 8 beams of light arrived above the imperial palace of the York Divine Kingdom and descended swiftly. The rulers of the 4 divine kingdoms were aware of this giant commotion. However, they could not understand just how these people had appeared. Could it be that they did not go through the ascending passageway? Preston looked bewildered and suspicious as he stared at the 8 young warriors in front of him. The core disciples present there had similar looks of confusion and astonishment on their faces as they gazed at them. Chapter 1438, Despair. These core disciples had all undergone the challenges of the illusion battlefield. After their elimination, they were still able to witness the battles that went on through the painting scroll. The last 300 people were born in the same era and were in the same realm as them, however, there was a big gap when it came to their strength. These were godly geniuses whose names echoed throughout the entire universe. They were the elite of this worst era and everyone looked up to them for salvation. They were the ones that the Supreme Lords all cherished and cared for as much as they could. So it was understood that their presence here shook everyone's heart to the core. Boom! There was a loud explosion as Zen crashed onto the ground. He still had the Thunderwind Divine Sword in his hand and sent out sword energy all over the place. Bang! 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 Zen forcefully activated the Chaotic God's intimidating strike's sword radiance and looked like a golden hedgehog in the process. The radiance pushed back a portion of the small skulls millions of feet away. It would take them a long time if they were to fly back. However, Zen was only able to push a few of them and the majority still rushed towards Preston. Multiple stars brilliance. Starlight flickered around Zen's body as he released an explosive force. The powerful shock waves caused many of the pure jade sacred place's disciples to lose their balance. Some were even lifted off the ground by 20 to 30 feet and fell heavily onto the ground again. However, this kind of impact was nothing for the warriors of the Soul Sea realm. The more powerful Zen was, the better their chances of survival. Tens of thousands of small skulls shot out again in all directions due to the powerful impact exerted upon them. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Because of the impact, some of the skulls launched into the air, all the way towards the sky. They had essentially turned into lethal weapons as the kingdom rulers watching from above immediately dodged the oncoming projectiles lest they get hurt. A few collided with the buildings and left them riddled with holes. Unsurprisingly, many grand monuments and exquisite royal sculptures were also shattered in the process. The trouble, however, was that despite being pushed back so violently, the skulls still turned around to come back towards them. Zen had carried several hundred skulls on his back when he was in the illusion battlefield. He too tried every means to get rid of them but failed. Rocher, he called out to Rocher for help. On the way there, he and Rocher had discussed what to do with these small skulls. Lucille, Nathan, and the others knew that the most troublesome part about these creatures was their curses. Even some supreme lords were at a loss how to fight back. Rocher, however, looked quite relaxed and told Zen that he might be able to deal with the curses. Everyone's gaze landed on him. He pulled out his soaring snake sword and stabbed it into the ground. Huff! A dazzling light encircled the blade. Soon enough, the entire place was engulfed by this light. Zen could only push back a portion of the skulls. There were some that still managed to break through the sky demon eliminating array and bite Preston along with a couple of core disciples. They were unable to resist since their life vitality had long since been exhausted. However, the dazzling light Rocher emitted did something strange to those skulls. The skulls that gnawed on the disciples suddenly stopped and turned to look at this light. It was as if they were moths drawn to a flame as they slowly began to float towards it. Even the ones Zen had pushed back were sucked in by this light and circled around the soaring snake sword. A bird's eye view revealed a whirlpool of skulls that rotated around the blade. Nathan, Lawson, and Lucille were also quite amazed by the sight. Rocher, how did you do it? Lucille asked. She had already come up with a backup plan if Rocher failed to deal with these skulls, and that was to use the shield of 5 elements. The skulls would eventually crush the shield, but it would take them at least 8 to 10 years to do so. She hadn't expected Rocher to pull out a move like this. He smiled at her faintly. The soaring snake sword can dispel curses in the universe. Even the malicious aura in your body can be removed with a single slash. Can you kill them? If we don't kill them, there will be hidden dangers, she said. A supreme lord once had skulls hanging on his body for 3 whole years before they disappeared. Rocher smiled confidently. You'll see in a bit. The godly geniuses trusted him. Rocher's confidence was enough to let them know that he knew what he was doing. Preston stood up and slowly walked towards Rocher. He was about to express his gratitude when a graceful figure suddenly flew in the air and shot over. Letitia had used up most of her life vitality, so even flying was difficult. In the end, she ended up falling right into Zen's arms. Zen was already waiting to catch her. As he held his wife, he could hear her painful sobs. Letitia had never been afraid of death. As a warrior, she possessed the type of courage that defied the heavens and readily faced death head-on. When she was in charge of Cloud Hall, she completely ignored everything else and buried herself headfirst into her role. She didn't have much to worry about back then, but it was different now. There were far too many things she treasured in this life and she couldn't leave this world behind so easily anymore. Chapter 1439, Chains of Curses. The core disciples were rendered speechless as they watched the skulls spin in the air. Not even Preston could resist the curses of the sorcerer race, but the godly geniuses dealt with them rather easily. And on another note, they accepted the astonishing fact without resistance. They understood that the godly geniuses' strengths couldn't be measured merely by their cultivation levels. Since these geniuses shouldered more responsibilities and missions in this grand era, it was necessary for them to have a broad knowledge of everything in the world. Meanwhile, Margaret was watching as Zen and Letitia held each other tightly. She was utterly disgruntled. Although she was willing to go and help Zen out, the scene in front of her was admittedly upsetting. After a long embrace, Zen finally loosened his arms and let Letitia stand on her own. It was their first reunion after 7 full years. With too many words to exchange, they wondered where they should begin. Finally, Letitia broke the silence. You've seen Jeffrey, right? Zen offered a gentle nod. Is he all right? She asked, the nervousness evident in her voice. Having ascended to the upper world for so long, she was always worrying about her young son. Of course he is. Let's return to the Cloud Hall, Zen suggested with a smile. He had decided to bring Letitia and the other important ones into the fairy palace. While the entire universe was in chaos, the fairy place remained absolutely safe. But the skulls, Letitia pointed at the sky. Numerous skulls still spun slowly in the sky above them like a huge, black cloud. "Just leave those to Rocher," Zen said with a laugh. To that, Rocher turned to him and nodded. With a flip of his finger, a strange sound came from the sword in his hand. It sounded like the hiss of a snake. In an instant, numerous strands of black lines appeared in everyone's eyes as they watched the swirl in the sky. These mysterious black lines linked the skulls in the sky and the warriors on the ground. Most of them were connected to Preston alone. Although Rocher didn't explain it to them, they all figured out what this meant. Preston was the curse's main target. The core disciples, meanwhile, found only a number of lines connected them to the skulls. Even Letitia was connected to the skulls with 2 black lines. These are the chains of curses. A curse is a rather special type of attack. Under specific circumstances, these chains are indestructible unless the curse is removed, Rocher explained promptly. These strong curses were caused by some sort of sorcery from the divine land. Very few people had the ability to break them, and even those who could found it difficult to do so. Because of this, even if some supreme lords were cursed, they couldn't bother to remove the curses. Instead, they merely allowed the skulls to stick to them until the curses dissipated on their own. But it wasn't the same for all the other warriors. The world lords felt pressure from the skulls while most of the warriors under the spirit transformation realm were doomed to death. Therefore, all warriors, regardless of their cultivation bases, would try to avoid the shadow race, also known as the sorcerer race, altogether. You can just cut these chains off by yourselves. It's much easier than you would think, Rocher added. With a snap of his fingers, a strand of a black line broke instantly like a fragile strand of hair. As the black line was cut, the skull on its other end started cracking until it soon vanished into thin air. With that, Rocher didn't explain any further. It was no easy feat to make the curse chains visible. This meant that the masters of sorceries from the divine land actually managed to grasp the curse in godly way. This practice declined after the soaring snake sword appeared in the world. It had the power to remove all kinds of curses. Although everyone could see the curse chains, they hadn't dared touch them, unsure if they should. After seeing how Rocher broke one line rather easily, they all began cutting off the chains that connected them to the skulls. They were all disgusted enough of the skulls that stuck to them all the while. As the chains were cut one after another, the skulls turned into ashes and disappeared. Among them, Preston was the most striking with tens of thousands of lines connected to him. He looked like some kind of monster with impossibly long hair. Summoning up his power of space law, he created a crystal cube that enveloped him and cut off all the chains of curses around him. In an instant, tens of thousands of skulls broke apart and vanished. Finally breathing a sigh of relief, Preston walked up to Zen and Rocher and cupped his hands as he said, "Thank you for saving my life." "Never mind, I should be the one thanking you. If you didn't offer your help, my wife wouldn't have survived this," Zen returned as he bowed to Preston with respect. He had heartfelt gratitude towards the man who saved his wife, after all. Although he had rushed and led his team to the Divine Kingdom continent as soon as he knew that Letitia was here, she would have died before he arrived without Preston's help. Has the shadow race been wiped out? Lucille was looking around to check if they were completely gone. It seemed they managed to escape danger for now. Whoosh. Just then, they saw several warriors flying right at them from afar. Brennan, the present emperor of the York Divine Kingdom, led the group. Behind him were the emperors of the other 3 divine kingdoms. When Brennan arrived first, he landed on the ground and greeted Zen politely. He had seen Zen before when he was still a prince of his divine kingdom. Chapter 1440, The Supreme Sorcerer. At the moment, what worried Brennan was that these people would feel reluctant to leave this place. He was after all the lord of the divine kingdom and couldn't let them really take over his continent. But after another careful thought, he realized that they didn't seem interested in his continent at all. No matter what, he had to talk to them. Zen folded his hands at the man, while the rest others didn't take these rulers of divine kingdoms seriously. They were definitely figures in the divine kingdom continent, but were not qualified to be the core disciples of some sacred place in upper world. After the crisis was resolved, they discussed the way forward. The core disciples naturally hoped to return to the sacred place, but none of them were clear about the situation in Pure Jade's sacred place right now. This problem was not difficult to solve. Zen and others could use teleportation token to return to the upper world, understand the situation and come over to inform them. But while their discussions were going on, there was a strange tower built in the shadow of the world. In the dark the tower gave off a strange green light, and the tower was located at the center of chaotic ocean of stars. Beneath the tower, thousands of giant skulls were floating, seeming to discuss something. These giant skulls seemed to belong to 2 groups. Although both of them belonged to the shadow race, one of the groups hid in this great world all the time, while the other entered the great world by chasing to kill Preston and his people in ascending passageway. And the heads of these two groups were two grand sorcerers. "Daily, how did you manage to let so many mice escape to the most important place?" said a grand sorcerer. The grand sorcerer named Daily, who seemed to be in a bad mood, shook his head. "Humph. I began to cut them off when they were going into the great world, and I have done my best. They have only a warrior from spirit transformation realm. You have enough power to wipe them all out, but you let them escape to such an important place. And you say you tried your best?" the grand sorcerer said coldly. But Daily shook his head again. "It seemed as if some supreme lords were watching over me. If I were to hit them by myself, I would have drawn the attention of those lords. That is why I had to let the others wipe them out. What we worried about the most happened in the end. If the plan was successful, it would have sped up the process. Don't you know how important this is to the sorcerer race? And now this turn of events," the grand sorcerer said angrily. Daily sighed. "Tell me how we can resolve this." "Where are these new guys from?" asked the grand sorcerer. Daily shook his head and replied, "How can I know about something that even you don't know? But it is worth sitting back and noticing that a bunch of juniors at the Spirit Supreme Realm could cut off the cursed chains with such strength. It goes to show that they are definitely not some ordinary beings." The grand sorcerer reflected and said, "If they will go away, leave them alone. Things will go as per planned. If those guys make any more trouble and barge into the chaotic ocean of stars, kill them without wasting any time. Right now the top priority is to control the current situation. And until the situation is resolved, you will not return to the upper world." Quote. Daily nodded. Daily was one of the grand sorcerers from ancient sorcerer race who led the attack at the pure jade sacred place. He did not expect that these people would choose the most special ascending passageway. It would have been better to have chosen some other way of ascending, and Daily would not have come down with others to chase them, landing him in such trouble. They were actually walking on thin ice at the moment. If their secrets were exposed, the situation could get worse. While the two grand sorcerers were discussing, a green figure gradually appeared out of thin air. The figure emitted a jade-green light, coloring the dark space in an even eerie way. When the two grand sorcerers saw the green figure, they simultaneously raised the bone cane in their hands. From their expressions, one could clearly distinguish the look of reverence on their faces. "Greetings, Supreme Sorcerer. Supreme Sorcerer, why have you made your appearance here?" The ancient sorcerer race also had their own hierarchy. Ordinary sorcerer race members were called sorcerer slaves. These sorcerer slaves had a very low status among the sorcerer race and their existences were insignificant. The stronger ones were war sorcerers, and this type of sorcerers showcased stronger fighting ability. Most of the ones killed by Preston were war sorcerers. The capability of grand sorcerers was already at the level of a world lord, who were able to rule an entire clan among the ancient sorcerer race. The supreme sorcerers were similar to the supreme lords in the entire universe. These supreme sorcerers didn't have any heavenly destiny, but the spells they used were able to fight against the supreme lords. There were even more powerful existences above the supreme sorcerers, such as the ancestral sorcerers and the sorcerer sages, who only existed in the divine land. The green figure's form rippled with a shimmer and an authoritative voice boomed out, "Daily, Dean." "Yes, my supreme sorcerer." "Yes." The two grand sorcerers quivered slightly. Judging from supreme sorcerer's voice, they could sense that he was in a terrible mood. "The godly geniuses have all descended into the great world. The old fox of the celestial position has already set his eyes on us. Why haven't you made your move yet?" the supreme sorcerer inquired.